Okay, so I'm sorry for the late start tonight, but we should be broadcasting. Uh, Life comes at you fast, and no matter how late I set these things, it always seems like family obligations. It always seems like family obligations immediately become more pressing the night I start these things. I'm just going to let people trickle in. I know I started 10 minutes later than I originally scheduled this live stream, but I want to make sure that everyone can actually hear me. um, Everyone can actually see this. I really should have just a dedicated room to do live streams, but it's just impossible to set up that way. You only have a few rooms in this house that can get good internet, and the ones that have silent surroundings, they're just not the ones that I can do this from. I originally did this in my private study, and I think I had the internet crap out on me several times in the night. So I decided, I'll just set up where the internet's good. But this, of course, has me racing around the house trying to get everything in order. Um, right before the actual stream starts, which is never really a good plan for anything. Um, so I've got the whiskey that I only ever drink during live streams here. So, and I'm going to wait probably until 9:30 before I start this. But tonight I wanted to talk about a few things that I had planned to make videos on. I had planned to make videos on these things that were edited and like quick takes, but I didn't really have the time to do the editing. And I was looking at my own YouTube interactions, and what's strange enough is that it seems that the streams I'm doing, they have almost as much interaction as the edited videos. So this really got me to thinking that I should just try to put more of the small response video formats in something like a presentation that I could do during one of these distance streams. And then people could comment and I could kind of elaborate on these things as they go. The issue is, of course, is that obviously I'm thinking about this stuff a little bit more on the fly. I have notes that I'm working off of. I have slides that I can show, but I really don't have anything else. I don't have the ability to decide, oh, this is a bad take. I haven't rehearsed this. So I'm kind of going into this cold. But this is sort of, when I start this talk, I think this is going to be kind of the product of two general videos I could have made that really go to the heart of the direction of the right wing, especially after 2020. I think this has been a landmark year for everyone in terms of realism and in terms of actually evaluating how power differentials are and how they're working, especially with regards to the mainstream. I think it's sort of the anti-2016. In 2016, everyone on the right convinced themselves that the ordinary rules of discourse no longer applied, and all you need to do is get out there and say it like it was, and it didn't matter who you offended, because the internet had this brave power to bring forward ideas that were ordinarily considered taboo, and this was going to be the end of our ordinary understanding of political discourse in the Overton window. And of course, I think the last 4 years have demonstrated that nothing like this is the case. And, in the present year, in 2020, it seems like very few of our ordinary understandings of how discourse should operate, well, before just this year, are not really taking root at all. They're not really, we can't count on things. I think people thought, oh, well, there's always going to be a status quo that will be defended and that will be upheld by the system. And this means that certain things can't happen. And it's hard to say. I'm not really so sure what could happen in present year. Certainly with regards to the whole free speech and open platforms, that's been a big deal. So I guess considering that it's 9:30 now and everyone's hearing me, I'm going to get right into it. So this week, and when I saw this video, I kind of knew this was coming. This week, what starts off this talk is that the right-wing blogger or vlogger Keith Woods did a response to Mencius Moldbug, or Curtis Yarvin, one of the founders of the NRX movement. Curtis has been doing the rounds on various podcasts. He has a set of, I think he has 2 sets of new essays. He's like me. He's always faster to start these things than he is to finish them. But nevertheless, he's been coming into visibility again, especially for people on the online right, after almost 8 years of being completely dormant. And one of the newer right-wing YouTubers, who I've had some interactions with in the past, e.g. in the fact that we made response videos to each other, one of these new YouTubers, Keith Woods, made a response video which had a very scathing take on Curtis Yarvin or Mencius Moldbug. And a lot of people wanted me to respond to it because everyone knows that aside from the typical Catholic authors, Moldbug is one of my bigger influences when it comes to contemporary thinkers, at least when it comes to contemporary secular thinkers. And, it was an interesting video. And I guess the criticism, I'm going to switch over to make sure that this presentation is running. The criticism kind of runs in 2 parts. And I can't really give a refutation of Keith's take on Mencius Moldbug without getting a little bit personal or perhaps dramatic, because I do appreciate Keith Woods as a content creator, but sometimes he has really irritating ways of taking on people and ideas. He has a way of playing a frame game, which is really, really consistent, and it's really irritating, and he does it with every single thinker, and this is what he did with Moldbug as well. And the classic kind of frame game that Keith Woods likes playing is first of all, he insinuates that they haven't read enough. They're not serious. They aren't really grappling with the key texts. He has this sort of, I don't think he comes from an academic background, but Keith Woods, like many an internet intellectual, affects a sort of academic language and temperament. He knows what jabs really get under the skin of people who are trying to engage with intellectual ideas. So his first MO is always to question whether the person has read enough. This is kind of a classic internet intellectual take. And it's kind of funny because I believe even in his last video, Keith Woods was making fun of Kurt Doolittle and John Mark for pulling just the same kind of trick. But usually Keith follows this up with some minor factual correction. He'll comb through the videos that this person has made or the blog posts, and they'll find some kind of factual error. In mine, Keith Woods highlighted the fact that when I was talking about how Plato and Aristotle disagreed with each other and they needed to either be unified or refuted, or somehow one needed to be elevated over the other, I pointed out that Nietzsche was someone who tried to unify them. He corrected me and said Nietzsche was someone who tried to refute them. And of course, I'm 10 years away from reading Nietzsche. I'm 10 years away from reading Aristotle and Plato. I read these authors when I was more or less Keith's age in my early 20s. And I, with a full-time job and a baby and all this stuff, I'm not going to, if I'm referencing these things, I'm referencing them from memory. And so it's always very easy to find small s misattributions. And then Keith combines usually these small errors that he finds with some general criticism of their style. And then finally, he links this to something that sounds more substantial, and he says that they really haven't come to the fundamental critique of modernity or critique of progressivism or critique of capitalism that you would need to really take this issue seriously. They haven't overcome that hurdle. And always the conclusion after every Keith Woods video is that the person he's criticizing isn't really as serious as they think they are, perhaps, or certainly that Keith Woods thinks they should be in order to get an actual refutation that goes to the substance of their arguments. And sometimes there are some substantive answers inserted in there, and I'm going to get to some of those substantive critiques of Moldbug a little bit later. But for the time being, I'm going to complain about this really irritating style that Keith affects in most of his response videos, because it's funny, because this sort of MO of questioning how much the person's read and finding these minor factual errors and making stylistic criticisms, it's a great frame game, but it's always the same one. It's flat out poisoning the well. And what's so funny is that he's obviously sort of doing this as a script. He treated my own response video to his work the same way that he treated UR and Moldbug's work. It was the exact same form of the criticism. And just to show you how kind of funny this was, when I was watching Keith Wood's criticism of Moldbug, he starts off on the video and is like, "Oh, I can't do the Irish accent." He's, in his nice deep voice, he says, Moldbug, he always talks in this. He has tons of references, and he drops all these names of obscure authors, and you can never really figure out what he's getting at. And that's funny, because then he launches into his typical criticism, which is, the first one is stylistic. Oh, he quotes too much. He's too archaic. No one could have read all these obscure books Curtis Yarvin quotes. And then 1 second later, it's, oh, but no, he hasn't read enough. He hasn't attributed his own ideas to the ideas that came before him. And he's just totally out of his depth intellectually. He needs to go back and read more, whatever Keith Woods has read. And the net effect of this criticism, I know Keith Woods, what he wants the viewer to take away from this is that Moldbug has stylistic problems, and he also hasn't read enough. But if you put the stylistic criticism of citing too many obscure books with not reading enough obscure books, you just get to the criticism that Keith's actually making, which is that Moldbug hasn't read the specific obscure books that Keith Woods thinks are essential. Which, this is what academics do to sound smart in front of an audience whenever they're in front of anybody, is they always insinuate that their side would be vindicated if only their opponents, only their critics, if only the people they were criticizing had just read more, had just taken the text more seriously. And I've worked most of my life in academia. Yeah, it's been on and off between academia and industry, but I have a good knowledge of how this game works, and it's irritating even in faculty rooms to hear this. Even inside an academic conference, it's irritating to see this trick being done. But it just goes doubly when it comes from a blogging context, because blogging is all about participating in a conversation that's going on right now. It's discerning, it's dialectic that's occurring not in real time, but that's occurring fast. And the same thing is true for the written form blogs as well, like Unqualified Reservations. Unqualified Reservations, I think has turned me on to more books than anything I've ever encountered in the blogosphere. It's kind of an old-fashioned way of putting it. It pretty much had its own bibliography, and was far and away the best cited blog I've ever read. But the criticism is always there, and the criticism could be applied even to people who do write academic papers with bibliographies that are 20 pages long. But considering that we're doing vlogs and blogs and not PhD theses, we have to step away from this, oh, you misattributed this quote, therefore you're not serious. This is evidence that you haven't read enough. Or if you haven't read the specific things I have, that means you haven't read enough. If you do this, if you impose a standard, you're going to end up with, you're only going to be left with PhD theses in video form, which will be no fun to watch. And even from a person, I should say, who reads a PhD theses on a semi-regular basis, I can assure you that, every now and again you encounter a misattribution of a quote. There's always some citation problems here or there. Does that mean we throw the entire idea in the trash? Of course not. But this is kind of the game that Keith has us playing right from the start. And he actually, and to Keith's credit, this isn't just what's going on. He does actually go somewhere with this. But I do feel a little bit frustrated that I think the two criticisms, the evidence that Moldbug really doesn't understand what he's talking about. There was one misattribution of a quote that was, I think, done on a live stream. Which, I don't know, if you're going to nail people for misattributing quotes on live streams, welcome to YouTube. I don't know where you're going to start with that. If you don't know exactly what Emerson and Thoreau said and how that differs from the 20th century thinkers like Karl Popper, then get out of YouTube. You're just not ready for it. So there's that, and then the other one was even funnier, and I'm gonna bring to the close sort of my more bitchy comments on Keith Woods. What was even more funny was Keith Woods, his second big faux pas he tries to nail Moldbug on was, can you believe it? Can you believe it? Moldbug cited Buddhism as something that inspired our current capitalist consumer culture, and. I heard this, and I'm probably not quoting Keith Woods exactly. Indeed, Moldbug has been doing the rounds on live streams, and in every one of the live streams, he has his he's this kind of person that thinks of his jokes ahead of time. I don't. Aside from these slides, I didn't really do any preparation for this. I didn't have time to, really, except for a few chicken scratch notes here. But Moldbug is a person, unlike me, who has all his jokes written in advance. So if you've listened to any of his podcast appearances, you know that he has the Buddhism joke ready to go, and that's when he describes our current globalized world order that's all a function of GDP, consumer growth, consumer-driven spending growth. He says. And of course, since Silicon Valley, and this I'm trying to do the Curtis Yarvin voice, Curtis Yarvin says, and of course, because all of these Silicon Valley moguls, because they're all so up on Buddhism, they're obviously running the economy to fulfill all human desires, just like Buddha said, with the obvious implication that it's a joke. Right? The obvious implication is that's the opposite of what Buddha said, and he's mocking he's mocking these CEOs who are all into Buddhism and mindfulness meditation and whatnot, all these new age philosophies that are self-empowering. He's mocking them because they haven't even taken on board the very wisdom that they claim to get guidance from whenever they do a TED Talk or something. And in one of the podcasts, Moldbug actually stops it and points out that this is a joke. But somehow in listening to this or reading this joke, Keith Woods thought that this was serious. He thought that Moldbug actually thought that modern economists or modern capitalist CEOs, in their desire to solve human problems by driving consumer spending and GDP, that they were actually taking this from Buddhism, that this was a genuine Moldbugian idea. The consumer economy ideologically derives from Buddhism. I just thought that was funny. But okay, I should get on to the serious points that Keith is trying to make and trying to address when he talks about Moldbug, and he does make a sort of substantive critique, and this is namely that this critique that Curtis Yarvin made, or mentions Moldbug made, largely concerning the cathedral and how ideological control works inside of democracies. His argument is that this is an older idea that's cribbed from Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was this Italian theorist, and ironically enough, if you look back at Unqualified Reservations, Moldbug's blog that, was prominent a decade ago, Gramsci does not really prominently appear. And Keith Woods quotes several. He doesn't quote Gramsci himself, but he quotes I forget which one. He quotes one of Gramsci's contemporary critics, summarizers, and he postulates that Gramsci's description of ideological hegemony is more or less the equivalent of Mencius Moldbug's idea of the cathedral. And this shows, of course, in Keith Wood's manner, Keith Wood's frame, that Moldbug he just hasn't properly constructed his bibliography. You know, if he had done the reading, Keith Woods wouldn't need to condescend and deal with this guy, Mencius Moldbug, who obviously hasn't read enough books to have this conversation the way that Keith Woods is. Well, what's kind of funny about all of this is, Moldbug does not, and this is clear if you read any amount of Unqualified Reservations, Moldbug does not assert that his notion of the cathedral, or his notion that ideological control extends through culture and extends through education and extends through non-political means. And then when you look for how control is divvied up in the society, you can't simply stop at the formalized political apparatus. You need to do an extensive analysis on education, on music, on culture, and there can be organic ways that this could congeal and become a mechanism of control. Certainly Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, in his prison diaries, touches on this in his notion of cultural hegemony. That is absolutely true. And Moldbug does not cite him, but Antonio Gramsci was not the first person to come up with this kind of idea. Most immediately, in terms of influences, Antonio Gramsci was influenced by another Italian who's very near and dear to my heart because I come from a technical background that makes use of a lot of statistics, Vilfredo Pareto, who you can see, and I have this slide down here if you want to look at the men. Antonio Gramsci is kind of looking is towards the left, looking a bit gender ambiguous, and Pareto's on the right of Keith Woods, looking like he's the pre-incarnation of Chris from Missing the Mark. So at any rate, Gramsci modified a lot of ideas that were coming out of right-wing thinkers to modify Marxism. His influences go directly back to people like Pareto, who were asking themselves questions, who were posing questions to sort of the standard modernist, the standard ultra-liberal concept of how politics works, where you kind of construct this barrier around the political apparatus and go, okay, this is where politics goes on and this is where culture goes on, and there's really this division. And once you break down this dichotomy, really you can launch a lot of criticisms towards power and towards invisible power. And of course, Pareto touches in on this. I think his book was The Managerial Revolution. I'm more familiar with Pareto's political work as is Moldbug through the author James Burnham, which I completely recommend in his book The Machiavellians. And this should sort of immediately gets you to my next point. Even Pareto isn't original with this idea that power is sort of fluid, that it endemically flows through all institutions, that you can construct invisible power through controlling culture and cultural consensus. As Burnham's book title suggests, this idea goes back to Machiavelli. And hey, if you can take it further and further back, and you can say, oh, hey, you can look at Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle talks about concepts of control that extend to politicized music. And Plato, in his book, when he describes the Socratic dialogue of the Republic, people talk about politics flowing through every aspect of the consensus-making institutions of a great society, not simply located purely inside the political apparatus. So when you look at this in its most general form, the idea of an organic consensus controlling power behind the scenes, it's not a new idea to Moldbug, and Moldbug never claimed it was. If Antonio Gramsci wants to claim it as his idea, I think there's some problems with that, because this idea keeps on going back and back and back. It's a very, very old idea. And I think if you honestly look at the bibliography of this general idea, you'll see that it's really not so much that this organic idea of consensus as power is some kind of original idea that someone came up with. It's more or less just a true observation of how reality actually operates. And sometime in the late 19th century or early 20th century, in the wake of modernistic and ultra-liberal theories about how politics should work, we lost track of how politics actually does work. And so all of these people like Gramsci and Pareto and Mencius Moldbug, they're all pointing to the same concept, and they're putting their own little spins on this, you know? And this is sort of where I think the substantive sort of bitchy critique that Keith Woods makes about Moldbug, it sort of leads to the more substantive critique. And like I said, I hope people don't take that my bitchy criticisms of Keith Woods are an indication that I have no respect for the man's intellect or contributions. I think he's a fine video maker. I really respected his takedown of proprietarianism. That was quite complete, I should say. But this sort of segues into what the main criticism is, right? Because if Gramsci has a concept of hegemonic power, and Moldbug has the concept of the cathedral, and Pareto has his own idea of this concept, and they all have these subtle little differences, the devils and the angels of these theories are really going to be in the details. They're going to be in what does this theory tell us about how this consensus-making apparatus is going to evolve. If we see a problem in the consensus or informational apparatus of our society, what caused it? How can we root cause it? How can we potentially solve it? And how can we predict what it's going to do in the future? And I think this is the beginning of Keith's substantive critique of Moldbug, but it's also, I think, the beginning of where I really start to part ways with Keith Woods. It's also where this particular presentation is going to get a little bit dangerous for my channel, even though I'm on the more PC side of this argument. So Moldbug does not just simply say that organized consensus-making apparatuses occur naturally in societies and naturally wield power. Again, I think that's a common observation in philosophy. Moldbug has a certain characterization of where this power apparatus came from. And specifically, he makes the case that it evolved in the universities and in the media, and specifically it evolved, as you might expect, since the universities came from a Christian country and were initially Christian seminaries themselves. This cathedral evolved naturally from that. It evolved from this ultra-liberal, ultra-modernist Protestantism, this post-Darwin Protestantism. And because we had this, especially in the United States and England, this concept that the state was manifestly, or I should say, should solidly be separated from religious apparatuses, and subsequently the apparatuses of the academy should be separated from religious apparatuses, naturally this rule produced a type of progressive Protestant universalism that came to dominate and characterize the consensus that Mencius Moldbug called the cathedral. And here I think you see a real divergence between him and, I'll just take for instance Antonio Gramsci. Keith Woods was kind enough to include an entire quote from Antonio Gramsci. I have it on my phone, but I'm not going to read it here. But he talks about how the hegemonic information consensus comes about. In a similar way to Moldbug, he describes it coming about through just the business as usual, basically. I think Moldbug would say organic and evolutionary because those are the buzzwords that we like in the early 21st century. Gramsci, being an early 20th century man, used a different word, and I can't quite remember it. But if you notice, even in the quote that Keith uses, Gramsci makes predictions about what this consensus is going to seek out. He says the consensus is going to seek out business as usual, profit, imperialistic power, and the status quo. That's interesting. That's not exactly what our current... that's not exactly what our current idea... our current ideas makers are the people who decide the nature of the culture we consume. When you look at how they have behaved over the last 20 years, are they maximizing for imperialism in the early 20th century sense, the status quo and raw corporate profits? And we're talking about the consensus, whose most recent act is to essentially foment riots and instigate riots and excuse riots that burnt down the business sectors of a half a dozen major metropolitan areas in the United States, and who's gone on to burn down statues and foment and instigate all sorts of weird ideas of egalitarianism that I think, in my honest estimation, will in 30 or 40 years' time make this country virtually ungovernable, if it's not ungovernable already. That's Gramsci's prediction of what this thing is, what the consensus is and how it originated, doesn't actually correspond to what it's doing now. And so I think we have to look a little bit deeper. And so I don't think Keith Woods ever honestly engages with this idea that Moldbug had of this secularized, radical, universal Protestantism, this Christian heresy that the cathedral is. But Keith Woods has his own ideas. I don't think he really disagrees that what we're fighting is a consensus-making informational apparatus. He mainly disagrees that this is something that we can characterize the way that Moldbug did. In the sense, he doesn't like that Moldbug left a few things out. So we're arguing what is this consensus-making apparatus that made our society decadent? What can we properly call it? And here, here's where I get into some thorny area. Keith Woods has two theories about how this consensus-making apparatus arose that are distinctly not Moldbugian, that are addressed in passing by Moldbug. The first one is the Gramscian idea that this is the consensus as it originates is a machination of global capitalism. Capitalism is a word that I don't like using. I think it obscures more than it elucidates. Actually, that's Keith Woods' very criticism against Moldbug's cathedral, but I feel the same about capitalism. To me, it's vague, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But by this, Keith Woods literally means the GDP maximizing institutions that are governmental or non-governmental, and the GDP maximizing corporations that buttress and support those apparatuses. We're talking about the IMF, the international banks, all the large corporations like Amazon, and certainly, I'm going to sympathize here. They have been an accelerating feature of this. Oops, I accidentally misclicked that. I apologize. Let me recenter this here. They have certainly accelerated this. The second thing Keith Woods says is manifestly missing from Moldbug's analysis is an extended conversation of the villainy of a certain ethnic group that, if I mentioned explicitly, will certainly get this channel taken down, even if I'm disagreeing with Keith Woods' thesis. I don't want to risk it. So let's just say a blue ethnicity. The blues are behind this, and he points to a particular thinker, Kevin MacDonald, who I think is a professor at Santa Barbara. God, what tenure did for you 30 years ago is truly amazing. But this Kevin MacDonald made a career of documenting bluish interest in the West and put forward a larger thesis that this was the consequence of this manifested in much of the negative cultural developments that many conservatives and reactionaries bemoan. And this critique, I should say, unlike the one on capitalism, which I think Moldbug addresses, but addresses more generally, Moldbug actually does have an entire essay called "Why I'm Not an Anti-Semite," where he goes over why he does not consider the bluish conspiracy theories to be something that is worthwhile intellectually to pursue as the cause for why the cultural problems exist. And I think I'm a little bit frustrated again with Keith Woods that he his refutation of Moldbug's "Why I'm Not an Anti-Semite" essay is really, I think, dismissive and doesn't capture Keith Woods' main point. And someone pointed this out on Twitter. I can't quite remember the username. I apologize for that in advance. But Moldbug in his essay says all these people like Kevin McDonald, they have this volumes and volumes and volumes of all these documentations of certain individuals who had a blue ethnicity, of them being bad actors. But the problem is that, and them being ethnocentric, and them being nepotistic. But the problem is it never comes together to meet their stronger criticism. What we're looking for is not simply that there were bad actors who were blue. We don't necessarily are even wondering if there wasn't a certain proclivity for blue people to be ethnocentric or perhaps even nepotistic. The argument that this has culminated in basically protracted and intentional societal destruction, that's never really well evidenced by any of these individual cases. And Moldbug, in his essay, I fully recommend Why I'm Not an Anti-Semite. It's more or less my take. He compares this to Johnny Carson or any kind of legalistic hand-waving. There's a certain strategy in legalism and trial when you're trying to prove the guilt or innocence of something or some conclusion. You overwhelm the people involved with factual details about the specific things that support your case, and your viewers can only focus on one thing at one time. They kind of have the blinders on. So they look at all of these individual cases, right? And of course, the broad range of all these individual cases implicitly tells a story. But the problem is that when you stand back, the story doesn't really seem very likely. It seems like it relies on coincidence. This was certainly the case in how Johnny Cochran ran the O.J. Simpson trial. He focused entirely on the police were racist and the glove doesn't fit. And he had reams and reams of all this information about how the LAPD was racist. He talked endlessly about how the glove didn't fit. The problem is that it didn't matter how much information you could dump on those two facts. He was ignoring all of the other facts that essentially did not corroborate this story. And moreover, when you stood back and you took a look at the entire thing, how could you even imagine a world where OJ didn't kill his wife? So many things had to go. There would have had to have been a massive conspiracy in order for this to be the case. And you can see this in modern things like 12 Angry Men, or there was a podcast back in 2014 called Serial, where they did this trick with Serial, the same one that you did in the movie 12 Angry Men. There's all this evidence against a murderer, and you look at every little piece of evidence, you find a little thread of thing that's wrong with it. And at the end of every episode, or at the end of every conversation, it sounds like you refuted it, but you really kind of haven't. And then when you take a look at the broad picture, none of it makes sense. And of course, Keith Woods, his mischaracterization of this is that Moldbug is claiming that it can't possibly be true because there's too much evidence for the bluish theory of cultural decline, which is not the point Moldbug is making. And of course, in case you're wondering, the third picture here is universalist progressivism or universalist progressivist heresy. I think that's Upton Sinclair, and I've got like the multiculturalism thing in his brain here. But that's obviously Moldbug's thesis. And I think these are sort of the, if you're trying to decide, if this is a murder investigation and you're trying to uncover the cause of all this cultural disruption, maybe you could see this as a police lineup, and you'd have to ask yourself, okay, man, which one of these villains made your culture decadent? And you know, I'm going to obviously in this talk, I'm going to I think vehemently support Moldbug's conclusion that what we're dealing with is something that's internal. But at the risk of taking this channel down, I'm going to take a few moments here and give some sympathies for the devil. I'm going to tell people, maybe from Keith Wood's camp, maybe from BreadTube, why I sympathize when they want to point fingers at capitalism or the blues as being the cause of their problems. Uh, Everyone sees the problems with global financial capital. They get rich, they destroy the economy, and then when things go belly up, they get bailed out because they're too big to fail, and they have absolutely no remorse for this. People at Goldman and Sachs, they cash in when times are good, they sell risk, and there's no moral hazard. And then when they get the big paychecks, when they get the big payday, when the economy's good, they act like they're masters of the universe. They act like they're actually doing something, when really they're just usurers. And so many of our capitalists are they're just making money off of money, absolutely making no contributions to the system. Ideally, they're mitigating risk and making and actually making the market work. But since they're not actually obtaining any risk, it's 100%. It's public profit, private risk. And the same thing is true with Amazon. I can't tell you how irritating it is to see Jeff Bezos, who to my knowledge isn't blue, I'll just throw that out there, get up and act like he's the master of the universe who had this great invention when he just did what everyone else was doing, and he happened to be in the right place in the right time, and he's large enough so that he can run his company with basically zero margins. And yet he feels like his access to global trade and global capital and liquid global capital, his ability to move $30 billion of merchandise from one continent to another, that this is as sacred a property right, if not more, than a family has to a house that they've bought. Perhaps even more, right? Because Amazon is making that magic GDP number go up, and your house isn't, right? Your house is it's just static capital that isn't doing anything on the market. It irritates the hell out of me. I understand why people are angry, but I don't think it's a good explanation, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And the same thing is true. I have some irritations about some ethnocentric blind spots that are obviously endemic within some thinkers in certain ethnic communities that are mentioned by Keith Woods and by Kevin MacDonald. I have this long-standing internet Twitter feud with the liberalist blogger Zarathustra's Serpent, who's an Israeli. He comes from a reactionary ethno-state. And he's made video after video after video where he's talked about how the Israelis, the larger blue community worldwide, they're a tight-knit ethnic community. And if you question how tight-knit, how necessary it is for them to have a nation of their own, for them to have interests that they defend themselves, I mean, that's the worst thing you could possibly take away from a person. And actually, I agree with all that. I think I'm perfectly happy with these people to have their own homeland and to defend their interests. That's everyone's right, in my opinion. But then Zarathustra the Serpent immediately turns around and asserts that any attempt to unify various different European ethnicities in any larger conglomeration than the actual small little nation states they currently occupy, any attempt to organize them into a larger European culture or indigenous European culture is just the height of racism. And how could you? This is Adolf Hitler 2.0. This is racism reborn, and it's because his ethnicity has this thing called nationhood, and the European ethnicities do not. They are not part of a common nation. And I always walk through him with this. I don't understand. Explain this to me, Zarathustra Serpent. How does a European Ashkenazi have common nationhood with an Ethiopian Jewish person? They've never lived on the same continent. They never lived in the common empire. They don't speak the same language. They don't have any of the same traditions. How do they have some kind of common ethnic identity, and the Danish person and the Swedish person doesn't, or the Danish person and the German doesn't, or the English and the German doesn't? After literally being part of common empires for hundreds of years, after sharing many of the same linguistic elements and then sharing a lot of culture together, it's pure bullshit, and you'll hear this coming again and again and again, this special pleading. I agree, it's irritating, but that's not But this is all, again, this is all just Johnny Cochran logic. This is all just us focusing on what is sort of, what constructs sort of an emotional narrative in our mind. It doesn't really get to the cause of this all. What is the cause of decadence? What is the cause of decline? And in my analysis, it has to be internal. The primary cause that we focus on, at least, has to be internal. And this is something we can talk about a little bit before I go on. We're all adults in this conversation. We're having an adult conversation. We're talking about something that exists in reality. And in reality, not in movies, obviously, but in reality, things have multiple causes. And so human beings don't interact with a world, and this is why the Johnny Cochran / 12 Angry Men / serial defenses work so well, is because we all think we're in a movie. We all think we're in 12 Angry Men, but we're not, right? In reality, things have lots of different things can be true at once, and lots of things can be the cause of a larger effect at once. And that doesn't really tell us anything about, how we root cause it, and whether it's misleading to say that this caused it or not. So let's say, for instance, that a man's brought into an emergency room and he's declared dead on arrival, and the most salient thing, the most immediate thing that happened is he had a bee sting. A bee stung him, and he died. Now, let me do the Johnny Cochran thing. Let me sort of overwhelm you with evidence that makes this narrative compelling. So we know that the bee stung him, and it delivered venom, and we know that the venom was the direct contribution to the fact that his heart finally stopped. And we know that bees kill a lot of people through this very process. Would you call the bee sting the cause of his death? Would that be the medically relevant thing? The medically relevant thing is that this body had an extreme reaction to what would ordinarily, or what should ordinarily, be brushed off as an ordinary occurrence. Getting stung by a common non-lethal insect is a common occurrence, and should be a common occurrence for any animal that lives in an ecosystem where there's venomous animals flying around stinging things all the time. I've been stung by a bee probably about 12 times in my lifetime. The relevant thing to this person's death is the internal allergic reaction to the bee sting itself. And this sort of is where the main criticism is. The problem with attributing things to capitalism, for instance, is not really that capitalism didn't accelerate it. It's also not to say that there are no bad actors who come from this ethnicity that Keith Wood specified. There most certainly are bad actors. But the body that we're talking about, Western civilization, should not be the thing that, once it gets put into contact with these forces, immediately collapses in on itself. These are common features of reality. Common features of the world are ethnocentric minorities and people who are trying to make a buck. The fact that we fell victim to these things is more relevant and more unusual. And so in root causing these things, when we look at capitalism, we essentially are prioritizing a model, in my opinion, that's just, it's guaranteed to give us an answer that's not really very useful. We didn't install capitalism. We didn't all come together and pledge allegiance to capitalism. By capitalism, I mean corporate organization of private property in a way to generate products. We use capitalism because we haven't figured out a better way to organize information that has to do with product and delivery other than markets. Markets are the best and most efficient technology to do this. Moreover, we haven't found a way to depoliticize production and to focus production in the ways that's needed, other than private ownership, and we haven't found a better way of mitigating risk than the corporation. Now, at any time, we could come out with a better model, we could come out with a better way of doing this, and I think very few people would have an objection to that. But to take the corporate model and to take the existence of markets themselves and to package them in this thing called capitalism, it leads to it leads to the very thought mistakes that you see made daily on places like BreadTube. And I can't remember who made this comment. I think it was either Settler's Lament or Charlemagne. You listen to BreadTube, and they complain endlessly about capitalism. That's the conclusion of every BreadTube video is capitalism did it. I still watch them, but you don't need to hold your breath for the conclusions of the root cause. You know that it's going to capitalism. It's like Scooby-Doo. It's always someone on a mask in Scooby-Doo, and in BreadTube the villain's always capitalism. That's always the answer. That's always the thing that's at fault. But you listen to them. You listen to their complaints about capitalism, and because they've conglomerated these necessary apparatuses like trade and corporatism and the market and private equity and private property writ large, because they've packaged them together, it's really given them a way to write off all of the world's problems, including the ones that we know aren't caused by capitalism, the ones we know existed before capitalism, the ones that we see exist even in countries that don't have capitalist modes of production. So, for instance, like a frequent complaint by BreadTubers is the indignity that you have to work to survive. Oh my God, capitalism has violated our rights because it makes us work. It makes us work just so we can survive. And isn't that just the worst thing ever? That's how capitalism, it's just the worst thing ever because it made us work to survive. It made us all poor. What the fuck are you talking about? Poverty is the default state of humanity. If you knew any history, that's manifestly apparent. Moreover, working to survive existed before capitalism, and it will exist even after we find a replacement for capitalism, or until AI literally runs everything on this planet, which I think is actually worse than us working for our daily bread. So you'll have transgender people complain that the reason why they're not comfortable in their own bodies and the reason why they have to have dangerous surgery to redesign their genitals and sterilize themselves is because capitalism. And that's because you've molded it into this boogeyman and what do boogeymans do? They generate excuses for you to pin things on, and they don't give you any good solutions. So you'll see in BreadTube, you'll see half a dozen things that are legitimate criticisms of capitalism, and then you'll see 24 things that are just their complaints about reality itself pinned on this boogeyman of capitalism. And very much the same problem exists when you talk to people who go on endlessly about Kevin McDonald and the problems with people from blue ethnicities. This doesn't generate any solutions, and moreover, it leads to this process where every bad thing can be attributed to this force in question, whether it actually did it or not. Because that's what you've constructed. You've constructed a mechanism for essentially coming out with an excuse-giving model. So again, it's not that. It's not that there aren't bad actors. It's not that there aren't capitalist bad actors. It's not that there aren't bad actors who might have certain ethnicities. But it's a poor way to go about root causing the problem. So here I'm going to pause and reiterate one of my favorite quotes of all time from another statistician like Pareto. I guess I'm just obsessed with statistics. I think every problem becomes better when you view it through a statistical lens. So George Bach said very famously that all models are wrong. Some models are useful. This is the famous quote. And it really gets to the heart of both a philosophical problem and also a practical one. The problem with this entire endeavor of figuring out what caused the decline of the West, or what's controlling the information apparatus of the West, is that human beings do not perceive reality independently, like just with facts. They perceive it through models, and specifically, human beings, when we talk about politics, we perceive it through narrative models, right? And this is where the problems with capitalism come in. The problems with capitalism aren't that there aren't problems with our economic system. It's not that there aren't problems with markets. It's not that there aren't problems with large capital private property. Those are all true. The problems with anti-Semitism is not that there aren't bad actors who aren't of this ethnicity. It's not that there isn't even perhaps ethnocentrism. Actually, I know there's ethnocentrism. It's not that there isn't ethnocentrism or ethnocentric blindness when it comes to individuals who have a lot of power who operate in this community. I know that's the case. That certainly is the case. The problem is that in order to interact with this, we naturally are invited to construct a narrative that gives bad results. Capitalism is not the reason. It's not the reason why you have to work to survive. And I think, the people of a blue ethnicity are not the reason why we're in the situation we're in right now, even though there might be some people from that ethnicity that could have contributed to it. And to borrow an analogy, with the bees, if you were to say, how can we stop people from dying of bee stings, the solution isn't to get rid of all bees. First of all, getting rid of a species like bees is unethical, in my opinion. You can't just get. Second of all, they play a valuable role in an ecosystem, and third of all, if the person in question is having this massive allergic reaction to one species, they probably have a massive allergic reaction to another species. The solution is to fix the allergic reaction. It's to give them a medicine that confronts the allergic reaction they're having to a venom that, really any healthy functioning body should be able to shrug off. Like I said, people of this ethnicity have been around forever. This current mode of cultural decadence and decline, and the way that our current informational apparatuses are deriving towards this decline, that's a new phenomenon. So again, it's the narrative I have problems with, and it's the narrative that I think that I'm really concerned about, and why I think we need to do the root cause accurately. So if you go to an engineering school like I have, and you study industrial engineering, one of the number one things they'll teach you to do is how to take a problem and root cause it. So you have something breaks in your machine, or something is going wrong in your assembly line, or a bug happened in your code. And now your job as an engineer is to go back and figure out what went wrong. Now, of course, if you ask an engineer, why did your car explode? We took it out for a test drive. The engineer is always going to give you an external explanation. So, okay, a car goes out for a test drive that an engineer built, and it explodes. So is it a problem in design? Oh, no, it's external circumstances. Well, is that true? Well, it could be. What if the car went out and hit a pothole, right? And it exploded? I'd say that would be a problem with the car's design, right? I mean, cars should be able to hit potholes. Potholes are common, right? If a car hits a pothole and it explodes, that's the fault of the pothole. Now, if the car goes down and gets hit by lightning, that might be not the engineer's fault, right? And so you see that, it could be that the pothole caused the car to explode. But I would never, as an engineering manager, go like, oh yeah, okay, sure, you're right, Mr. Engineer. Your car hit a pothole, and sure enough, that's what caused the chain reaction that caused the passenger seat to catch on fire. No, it's bad design, right? Cars should be able to drive over potholes. So if you go through engineering, we have to ask ourselves, when we're doing root cause analysis, is it unusual? Before we're going to do is we're going to come up with why this thing happened, and then when we come up with an answer for why this happened, we asked, okay, well, what caused that? And the root cause is where we stop. Now, when we stop somewhere, we want to have a few properties. It's going to be unusual, right? So therefore, if it's unnatural, if lightning came out and hit your car and it exploded, then you go, okay, it's the lightning's fault. Or if a meteor hit your car, it's a meteor's fault. I'm perfectly fine with that being the root cause. I can't expect engineers to make a meteor-proof car. So that obviously has to be one of the things. So if we stop there because it's just a freak accident nature. A second question, another reason we stop, it's this is not a common thing, but it's controllable, right? So, okay, well, we can't run the car at 2,000 RPM, right? I'm just coming up with a ridiculously high number, right? The engine just craps out at 2,000 RPM. So we can control that. We can prevent the engine from from running at that high revolutions per minute. And we can stop this problem from occurring. So that's another potential root cause. And the third root cause we always want to have is there a solution? Is there a solution? Or does the solution seem like it's something that we could all ever attempt? We can't fill up all potholes in the universe to prevent your car from exploding. So that's not a reasonable solution to this problem, right? We can reasonably expect that lightning's not going to hit it. And if we go back to the two explanations Keith Woods puts forward, that this is some combination of ethnic loyalties of a particular group and capitalism, we see that it fails on both of these tests. The forces that capitalism has us under, which are constant competition, that are constant pursuit of wealth, they are definitely something that's accelerating the degradation of culture. But the problem is that we haven't found any better way to run a global economy that does not rely on something that looks a lot like capitalism. We could somewhat correct it, but whatever we build, whatever culture we have, has to be insulated against that. A lot of the features of capitalism aren't going away, and certainly I don't think we're on the verge of a post-scarcity economy. So to end at capitalism and say, like, okay, well, the reason for our woes is that we're not in a post-scarcity economy. We're not in a world where everyone is just living in a commune utopia where everyone gives according to their production and takes according to their need. That is just a bad root cause. The same thing is for people with ethnic loyalties. This is another thing too. People with ethnic loyalties. All groups other than indigenous Europeans have fairly strong ethnic loyalties and a certain amount of nepotism and a certain amount of ethnocentrism. That's reality. It's reality just as much as having to work to survive is reality. And you could argue that some hypocrisies make certain groups of people more inclined towards these inclinations. But that still doesn't remove the fact that it's not controllable and it's not unusual. The unusual element of this interaction between Christian civilization and this ethnic group Keith Woods mentioned, who's unusual in this? That's the question. Keith Woods seems to think that it's the blue ethnicity that's unusual. I don't think that that's true. I think that there's nothing particularly unusual about that ethnicity at all, other than their ability to contribute to highly intellectual endeavors very, very effectively, and I would say certain religious revelations that occurred thousands of years ago and that aren't going on currently. The community behaves more or less like any other diaspora community. There's no uniqueness there. What's unusual is Christianity. Christianity is the unusual feature. And this gets us to, I think, Moldbug's really, the contribution of the cathedral is to recognize that the problem is internal. The problem is that certain aspects of Christian civilization have become heretical and pathological and destructive to the entire affair, and moreover isolated away from their original intention. The original intention of confession and guilt is to inculcate in the individual virtue. The original point of trying to turn the other cheek is to inculcate virtue, is to build a high trust society. Now, people have hijacked that instinct to essentially abuse it, to essentially create modern day progressivism, where these inclinations are not used to produce virtue, but are used to produce basically power for politicians and for people in the information producing sector of our society. This could not have happened in Orthodox Christianity, because it would be obvious that people were exploiting the religion to do this. The only reason why progressivism works so well is that that the inclinations that we're talking about are isolated from their spiritual and their original intent, purpose, and practice. I guess this sort of begs the last question, and the question that is naturally going to flow from it, the third question of the root cause. Well, is there a solution? And this is where I think we really get down to brass tacks. There is sort of a solution to capitalism. It's to reform capitalism, or to radically reform capitalism as I would want to do it. We're never going to reform capitalism to the point where, or at least in the foreseeable future, where we're getting rid of private property and we're getting rid of markets the way that early Marxists and perhaps even Marx himself, depending on which text you read, obviously wanted. I think that's ridiculous. So there'll be some people who always say that capitalism is still in effect, but there is a solution that we can radically reform it. Is there a solution for Keith's second problem? There is no ethical solution. There's always going to be people who are ethnocentric. It's reality. Human beings are ethnocentric. Is there a solution for Christian heresy? Is there a solution for an artistic sensibility and a moral sensibility that have been corrupted? I would say that there is a solution, and I would say that it is the only solution that matters. And that solution is to come up with new works, new leaders, new art, new spirituality that invokes inside our own civilization what it was actually meant to produce. And that is the necessary element of reform and revolution that we need to be focused on. We need to be focused on the internal immune system, the internal spirituality of the West. These other external features, we should be able to brush off as easily as we brush off a bee that's just stung us. Sure, it sucks. It's life. Let's move on. The reason why we can't move on is what we have to target, and that means doing the hard and necessary task of what the people like Mencius Moldbug and myself constantly point to. Become worthy, seek the beautiful, the true, and the good, and then enthrone that inside our own spirituality in our own lives. Now, this is going to involve a political project. Is this political project going to involve putting bad actors like Jeff Bezos, and I know Noel Ignatieff is dead, but the successors of Noel Ignatieff, is it going to involve putting them in their place and reforming away a lot of their ability to be bad actors? Almost certainly. But this process has to be focused first and foremost on developing that core internal solution. And that's really, in my mind, one of the key applications of Mencius Moldbug's Cathedral. It's the tendency of it to internally focus on Christian culture as being the thing that needs to be revitalized. Any project outside of the revitalization of Christian culture, and here Christian and Western are more or less interchangeable, or perhaps I should say the cultures of historic Christianity, the cultures of the Roman Empire, the cultures of Europe, and the cultures of the Near East that were part of the Roman Empire. The reform of this has to be, the solution to degeneracy has to be, first and foremost, the reform of this culture and the construction of, or the training of leaders and the construction of art and institutions that can facilitate that rebirth, that can facilitate that renaissance. And I don't see what chasing ethno-nationalism someone else's ethno-nationalism, or complaining endlessly about capitalism. I do not see how that's going to solve this problem in a productive way. So I think that's sort of my response substantively to Keith Woods. Now, one last thing I have to say here is there's another part of Keith Woods' talk, and he didn't really go into this, but he said it in passing, and since it's just stuck in my mind, because it struck me, maybe he didn't even really mean this, but I'm going to respond to it anyway, because I think it's better to assume that he did mean this. Towards the end of his talk, he said something to the effect of, oh, well, this is something that us on the third position, or us on the radical right, and by him, I think he means his particular clique on the dissident right, we have this all figured out. I can't disagree more with this. I don't know what to say. It's almost kind of funny. I think that right now the right is struggling with the problem of knowing the problems but not knowing the solutions. And to say that the right has these things figured out, it just sounds like the sort of 2016 Richard Spencer talking point. I mean, this might indicate who Keith Woods has been hanging out, and perhaps he should stop hanging out so much. But I never liked Spencer, and not least for this perspective that it seemed like him and half the other people he hung out with seemed to think that we had all of this figured out, that the hard intellectual work had already been done. In fact, I think it's only just begun. I think, and this is one of the reasons why Moldbug is useful, Moldbug is not an end point. It's a jumping off point. Look, Christian culture is broken. This is how it was broken. It was broken through a specific form of atheism, a specific form of secularism that evolved out of heretical Protestantism, of modernist Protestantism. It broke Christian civilization over the course of 100 years, and it got all of these productive instincts that we've had that made European society incredibly trust-focused and trust-oriented. It turned them all to self-destructive ends. It's essentially, it aids the problem. However, that's the beginning of an intellectual journey. The beginning of an intellectual journey, a beginning of a conversation to figure out what indeed can replace it, what spirituality can replace it. Obviously, I believe that begins with Christianity, but even then, that's just a beginning. Because what we will see is that we need a new Christianity. Our Christianity, I'll say this, post-Trent Christianity was very different. Post-Council of Trent Catholicism was very different from medieval Catholicism. And post-modern Catholicism, or post-meta-modern Catholicism, the Catholicism that carries forth, or the Christianity that carries forth, is going to have to be as qualitatively different as pre and post Trent Catholicism were from each other. And this is our and it's a Herculean task. It is a task as large as the Renaissance and the Enlightenment were, and it's something that we need to put our shovels down and get busy with doing. And this sort of brings me to the last section of the talk of the lecture I had planned tonight before I got to questions. And I hope I haven't gone on for too long, but this is this is what you signed up for, right? It's and I see someone from the chat, and before I go on, I don't mean Protestants are at fault. I mean that Protestant institutions are where this corruption developed from. And that's why this has sort of a Protestant characteristic to it. Believe me, Catholic churches, they have the paws bad in a variety of areas. But I think we need to keep in mind the Protestant roots from this when we start building back stronger. And this gets me to another video idea that I wanted to talk about, but wasn't substantial enough to actually dedicate a video on. And this is, I should say, a talk about organizing the right and really how we can conceptualize the goals of the right or the cultural war going forward. And this is something I see endlessly, and I guess it extended from this Moldbug thing too. There were a lot of right-wingers who were coming after Moldbug. There are a lot of right-wingers who go after people like Justin Murphy or who go after people like Jordan Peterson. And certainly I'm very sympathetic to the critiques that people have. I think, oftentimes, Moldbug has had a bunch of really bad ideas, and God knows we need people to criticize them. But this gets carried over into this weird thing I've noticed where someone has a bad take and immediately they're the enemy. They're our enemy that we need to destroy. And this gets to an instinct that I understand very, very well, because it's very, very subtle. This gets close to the problem of the cathedral and the problem of the outer party. So as we know it, and everyone's pointing to this fact, not just NRX people. The Republican Party is essentially an extension of the Democrats. It's an extension of the cathedral. It's the same thing moving slower. It's progressive. Conservatives are progressives moving the speed limit. So you're not really doing anything supporting conservatives. Moreover, I would go on to say, and I think almost all neo-reactionaries and a fair number of people on the dissident right would go on to say, that if you wanted to see something new, a new right, the worst thing you could do was to support people like Sean Hannity, who are making apologies for Reagan-style conservatism of 20 years ago. And if anything, we should be sort of rooting for this project to fail. And so naturally, this kind of comes up to this question that I think a lot of people on the right are wondering. Okay, so for rooting for the Republicans to fail, that must mean that the natural consequence is that anyone who's not 100% online, 100% on board with the most radical right-wing thing, they must too be the enemy. And it gets to the problem, like, why are Republicans a problem? Why are certain bad actors on the right a problem? And I made this case with Kurt Doolittle as well. When you regard someone, when I take a look at somebody, not whether I like them or not, a good example of this is Nick Fuentes. I don't personally like Nick. He's blocked me. At one point, maybe I blocked him. I don't think I did, but we don't get along very well, personally. But I consider him to be ideologically a force for good on the right from what I've seen coming out of him. And so we have to make a distinction between who are the people who we personally dislike, who we ideologically disagree with, but who are still allies, and who are the people who are the actual enemies, the people that we make that we want to make a hard political break from, and that we need to make a hard political break from. The distant right needs to make a hard political break from normie conservatives, and needs to make a hard political break from people like Tommy Lauren, because it's useless. They're totally useless, and they're counterproductive. And this is sort of perhaps gets to, people were asking about the second, the third graphic I had on this live stream. This gets me to the problem I see when we're talking about broader trends in the culture war. A lot of the difficulties we see is we have a very individualistic focused mindset when it comes to answering this question. We're like, okay, we have our soldiers on this side and they have their soldiers on this side, and we're fighting, and you're either on our side or you're on the other side. And if you disagree with me, you must be on the other side. Or if I don't like you, you must be on the other side. But we really need to be seeing this as a battle of intellectual ecosystems. The cathedral is an idea managing, it's an information managing organism. It is a space for ideas. It is a learning community. It's an organic learning community. It's a place where people talk about ideas and exchange information, and it's where new ideas come from. The way the cathedral is defeated is when a new learning community comes about that's stronger, that produces better ideas, that's better at organizing, that does everything that the cathedral does but better. So really our task is to build not an army so much as an ecosystem. And it reminds me of one of my favorite board games. Everyone knows I'm a board game geek, but maybe this is actually more educational. This is a classic board game from China, although it's more associated with Japan, because I think it grew to more popularity in Japan certainly in the culture of the samurai nobility, this is the game of Go. Now, the game of Go is done. I'm going to explain it very briefly. I hope I'm not nerding out too much. It's done by building walls around area. You're trying to cordon off area and to capture area that your pieces totally surround. And at the end of the game, you get points based on the amount of area that you surround. Now, this is always kind of dodgy. You take turns placing, the black player takes turns building walls out of black stones, and the white player takes turns building walls out of white stones. And you can place a stone anywhere on this 19x19 grid. It's a game that's of comparable complexity, more complexity than chess. And you're trying to build area. And of course, you can encircle your opponents and you can destroy their pieces by surrounding them. Now, the key to Go, and the reason why the reason why it's so difficult to learn this game, or at least more difficult to learn this game than chess. The reason why it's more difficult to learn than chess is that it's very tempting when you're playing this game to see the stones as if they're a little army. And your army guys, your black army guys, are going to come onto the board and they're going to surround all the white pieces and they're going to kill them, right? And that's not really how you should approach a Go game. A Go game is about capturing territory. The destruction of your opponent's pieces is more or less incidental. Moreover, the key thing in any Go game is what a Go player or a more advanced Go player will be able to say. It's being able to see life or death. When there's a point at which a formation is undestroyable, and then it actually becomes your territory. It's actually legitimately captured. When a formation has two eyes or two areas that are separated but contiguous inside themselves that are blank, this area is indestructible and it's permanently captured. Until then, and every point up until then, your opponent can potentially surround you and destroy you. So half of the game, or most of the game, is trying to figure out which of your formations are actually living and can be supported, that you can count on, which of them are self-sustaining ecosystems, and which ones are not. And it can be that playing your own pieces in the wrong position, they actually fill up and destroy your own ecosystems. They destroy your own territory. And so what I think people need to think about on the right, when we engage with each other, when we try to figure out who are our friends and who are our allies, they need to think more in this seeing life and seeing death perspective. The question is not whether the person has the right attitude or whether they're doing the exact thing you'd want them to. The question you have to ask is whether they make your intellectual space more interesting, better, more accurate, and if they more inviting to people who are interested in participating in ideas. Do they enhance the community or do they destroy it? And this is sort of the fundamental question that I'm going to end this talk on. You can say, I think this is sort of definitive with Kurt Doolittle and with John Mark. I said this before and I'll say it again. The reason that I considered them such bad actors and people that needed to be attacked online was that they were literally baiting the right into doing things that were destructive to our own intellectual community and to our own ultimate projects. But when it comes to someone like Jordan Peterson, when it comes to someone like Justin Murphy, when it comes to even people like Angela Nagel, these people are, when they participate in our spaces, even when they disagree with us, they're enhancing the sustainability of our community. They're making our community more lifelike, more flexible, more amenable to new and better ideas. And they're essentially allowing us to push back and live, even against potentially sustained opposition from the mainstream, sustained opposition by what Mencius Moldbug would call the cathedral. And I think that's what we really need to be asking ourselves. To my mind, Mencius Moldbug or Curtis Yarvin can have any number of shitty takes, but it won't change the fact that he fundamentally adds so many interesting ideas to the conversation. He brings so many new voices into the conversation. He opens up so many new vistas for exploration that it doesn't matter if he has 3 bad ideas that are obviously bunk or terrible. he enhances the ecosystem that we're trying to create here on the right. He opens the door. And I think that's something that I wish people like Keith Woods would, and I think Keith Woods acknowledged this in passing. But especially in the first part of the video where he's all on this, this kind of ridiculous framing tact where he wants to portray Curtis Yarvin as some kind of cretin who happens to be able to quote old tomes, but is somehow simultaneously not read enough. I think we need to give credit where credit's due. So that's the end of my talk. We were at about 11. I'll probably be going on for about an hour more answering super chats. I'll go on for as long as it seems rational to keep on going on, although I'll need to give my voice a break. So at this point, I'll try to answer super chats. Hopefully that was a good I don't know. Do people like these? Perhaps someone can reply me, and I can just approach this through osmosis. The chat tends to go a little bit too fast for me to actually take in questions from just pure replies. But I'd like to hear, do people think that these sort of impromptu lectures at the beginning of Distances, do they offer good value for people? Because I'd like to be able to do this where I have an idea or I have notes and I just give it in a distance like this, because it's way more time efficient for myself. And if people like this, it might be a more efficient way of doing things. I've kind of gone to the point where in my own career where I'm busy at work. I'm looking for more opportunities. I still have a job and I'm looking for a job. That's always kind of stress inducing. And obviously the family life, my time's limited and I want to focus on larger projects. I promised a video, a Trad Codex on Shrek, that I really, really want to get finished, and it's a larger project. And I don't want to have to do response videos to Keith Woods in a mode where I have to edit them. I think they might work better here. Okay, so let's go to the super chats, and actually, for a minute, I'm going to refill my water. So I'm going to temporarily mute myself, and I'll be right back with some water. Right. Okay, so I'm back. A lot of people when I was starting this live stream were giving me suggestions on what I should do it on, and I eventually, most people wanted me to give a response to Keith Woods, which is what I eventually decided on, because I was just itching to make a video anyway, and this saved me the necessity for making a video. Hopefully to concentrate what little time I have to make videos on better ones or ones that are more future proof. I mean, no one's going to care in 2 years what I say about Keith Woods, right? But when an honorable mention for a topic of tonight's live stream was last time I did one of these, which I think was 2 weeks ago, I'd built a reptile hutch in the backyard out of oak and nails, and I'm not the world's best carpenter, and I started with kind of a janky design. So it's kind of nice, but it's really janky. And someone wanted a tour of it. I was halfway tempted to take the camera out and show. This is one of those things. There's a lot of things I kind of felt like maybe people would be interested in like personal life stuff from me that people might be interested in seeing, like the reptile hutch I built. Or playing instruments or something like that, or just like life stuff. I know that will be very, very divisive to the audience. I was thinking I was telling the wife, maybe we should have like an Instagram account where we put all these slice of life stuff, because I think some people actually like that. I don't want to be too voyeuristic. That's sort of a flaw of our own age. But some people, one of the YouTubers I admire most, the Franklin, a lot of what he talks about, a lot of what I take from him, is he talks about what he's doing in his own life and like how he's educating his kids. And as someone who's going to have to do that in 5 years, I listen. That's like a huge part of his appeal, is talking about those things from his own life that serve as inspiration for my own. And maybe that would be something that I could put in some other format or on an alternative channel or something like that. I don't know. I mean, you always have to do these things. You always have to negotiate this with time. So let's take a look at the super chats. So Paul Cornelius, hey man, longtime friend Paul. He's one of the few people who has my number. So he always says hello on text. And I'm always busy because I'm always like working and I can never get back to him. But thanks for super chatting me, man. Again, if it wasn't lockdown, we probably could hang out more. Paul Cornelius for $5. Full burger and vodka. Playing some Warhammer. Got some Distributist on. Perfect. Playing Warhammer. Man, I that was a game I always kind of wanted to play. Never had the time to paint miniatures, nor really the skill. So, score a victory for me, I guess. I always, just to comment on this briefly, thank you for your contribution, I should say. I always, if I were ever to play Warhammer, I definitely would want to play the Imperial Guard. I like the Imperium of Man, and I like underdog factions. Underdog factions are great because in the games I do play, I always try to play the faction that's the underdog. And I was told that they're the Imperium faction that is the most unloved, unlike the Space Marine ones. So thank you for the super chat. Right Flag for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much. Have you ever seen Grace Kelly in Mogambo? Was she the most beautiful woman of all time, or what? Okay, is my wife here? Well, the correct answer is my wife is the most beautiful woman of all time. But if I'm allowed to offer second opinions, I think Grace Kelly, my wife was, my father was a huge Grace Kelly fan, I believe, when she was still making movies back in the 50s. And I know I'm really dating my own father when okay. Make your stupid joke about that. I know I'm really dating myself and by extension my father when I say that, but I believe he really liked her. I don't think I've ever seen Mogambo. Was she in the Maltese Falcon, or was that somebody else? Okay, if I'm allowed to offer any opinions on who attractive classic actors were, obviously my wife is the most attractive woman who's ever lived. But for classic actresses, if I was forced to limit myself to that, I'd probably say Audrey Hepburn or Vivien Leigh. I don't know why. I just thought they were something about brunettes with dark eyes always is very, very attractive. The Right Flag for $20 Canadian. So who killed Jesus? Was it the Romans? Well, I mean, there you go, right? There is obviously the Pharisees were the primary people who lobbied for Jesus's death. But then was Judas not also an instrument of Jesus's death? Was Pilate not also an instrument of Jesus's death? The classic lesson we take from Pilate washing in his hands is not to absolve people who stand back. It's to basically say that it's sins of omission, letting evil happen, is evil itself. Pilate is not by the washing of his hands absolved from guilt, and that's not obviously. And to say that is to say, in essence, Jesus died for all of our sins, and in some sense, who killed Jesus was the original sin of mankind. So you could even say Adam and Eve killed Jesus. He made the sacrifice on the cross necessary. This is to say, I don't think Christians, never as a Christian, do this song and dance with the Passion of the Christ. Do you remember when that movie came out? No, I don't like the movie for stylistic reasons, but it is a genuinely good movie, and it is a very faithful rendition of the Gospel of John. And when it was released, all of these organizations, like the Anti-Defamation League, other ones of a certain persuasion, they were all over Mel Gibson because he accurately portrayed the Temple Pharisees as being the primary people who planned, plotted, and lobbied for Jesus' death. I don't know what to tell you. The primary sources, the primary historical sources we have of that era show that that was the case. And if you're a Christian, do not, please, I implore you, please don't cuck on that. If we're going to draw the line on historical accuracy, I will stand by the gospel on this one. If you absolutely have to be tactical, you can say the truth that indeed Jesus died for all of our sins. And I don't even know if this is an appropriate question, but in pure historical fact, the temple Pharisees, the temple elders, they have to be accurately described historically as being one of the people who lobby for Jesus' death. And if we deny that, we deny the Gospels. And I just don't know what we have if we do that. So let's not cuck on that, please. Right flag again for Canadian $50. Thank you so much. What is your and other reactionaries' position on parental rights to raise their children as they say fit versus the state's interests to indoctrinate the youth? How does that relate to the infamous drag queen story hour controversy? Well, excuse me for adjusting my chair. That's a good one. Drag queen story hour is a failure of the state. And I think that this is something that, obviously, skin in the game is a primary reactionary or right-wing modus operandi, and it's one that I stand behind. And the sanctity of the family is a pillar of a core right-wing value. So in here lies a lot of very deep questions. My instinct is to always side with parents when it comes to raising their children. However, I do not think that the state needs, if Drag Queen Story Hour goes on, the state needs to be held responsible for the fact that that went on. Just in the same way that the state would hold parents responsible if they decided to raise their children and use them in child pornography. Even if it was non-disruptive child pornography. If the state allows that, the state is participating in harming children. So I would say just ban Drag Queen Story Hour. If parents want to politically lobby for Drag Queen Story Hour, like publicly carry signs around saying that I need the right to have my children play a part in a sexual fetish, and it's not Trans Story Hour, it's Drag Queen Story Hour. Drag queen is not even an identity. It's literally a sexual fetish. If they want to have that political battle, then we need to take a step back. We need to fight that political battle, and then we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, why is this going on in the schools? Why are we generating parents that believe that they need to have their children exposed to drag queens? Why do we have a media that plays ball with this? And if those two elements are fixed, I really don't think you're going to have any opposition or any desire for this. I think these parents are doing it for the virtue points. Once it's obvious that the society sanctions this, they're going to run screaming away from it, and they will attempt to hide their involvement in it if the culture changes. Now, it's a long road to haul. How do you get to that kind of very, very radical cultural change? But that answers the question in the abstract. The state does not need to allow Drag Queen Story Hour, an event, to take place. That's not an interference with the primacy of parents to raise their children, any more than it is saying that parents can't display their children in burlesque shows, semi-nude, for adult entertainment. And moreover, the state is absolutely responsible through its informational apparatuses and through its interaction with education and media. It's absolutely responsible for the fact that Drag Queen Story Hour is even occurring to begin with. Saying that means we need an absolute revamp of education if this is going on. We need an absolute revamp of our media apparatus. Or we need to separate ourselves from that media apparatus and we need to build our own alternatives, which should be more or less our main objective, our main MO in present year. So I hope that answers the question. It's a little abstract, but I think that's that goes a way to answering it. If you have a follow-up question, maybe I can answer it from the chat. A question from the chat about Christianity and race realism. Race realism is a biological possibility. Like, it either exists or it doesn't, right? Like, there's nothing. For instance, like, race realism would say that not all races have the same heights, right? I don't see how one race having a height that's 2 inches taller than another race, how would that refute Christianity? Like, if we discovered that Norwegians are 2 inches taller than Italians, would that refute Christianity? It would be technically race realism, right? I don't see why that would refute Christianity. And the same is true for any other organ or property that anyone might possess. Christianity absolutely asserts that people have equal dignity. It asserts that they have equal moral worth. As far as I'm concerned, statistical discussions about features like height or other genetic features don't bear on the question of whether Jesus is the savior of humanity. Nor should they, really. I don't see why, if it turns out that Italians are on average 2 inches shorter than Norwegians, I don't understand why any Christian would even be tempted to treat an Italian worse or to limit their opportunities. But I wanted to answer that one because I get that question so much. Even though it wasn't a super chat, I decided to give it a cut in line. I mean, to me, it just seems so easy to answer that question. Explain to me why Christianity should even comment one way or the other on this controversy. I don't understand. Okay. The last one, please. Oh, excuse me. Andre Zobievsky for $5 Australian. What do you make of the Russian vaccine and the current Belarus protests? What do you make of Putin's Russia as a fixation of conservatism in general? Well, if the Russians actually do have a vaccine, this would be one of the largest blows to the cathedral ever. It's almost, I don't know, I think, if the media and medical establishment and the universities, if they know that this vaccine works and they're sitting on it, the cathedral has just, they've handed the right a weapon that could accelerate their downfall astronomically. We could cut 20 years off their life easily with that piece of information. And it's such a liability that I doubt the veracity of the story, right? I know that the cathedral is getting dumber and dumber and dumber. I know the people who staff and manage educational institutions and that staff and manage the institutions that staff, or the people who staff and manage educational institutions or media institutions or medical institutions, I know that their savvy and perhaps even their IQ is lowering precipitously in present day. But I just don't think they're dumb enough to sit on this. if Russians had a vaccine, they could test it and they could reintroduce it and they could name it something different and they could call it their own and they could just bury the story. But if they sit on it for like 3 months and it turns out to be the vaccine, oh man, the amount of damage that could do to them in the long run would be astronomical. But as right wingers, our goal should be to find out the truth as fast as possible. I think that we have to be cautious when we hear these rumors and we jump in with them. We should say something like, there are rumors that Russia has a vaccine, or Russian officials are claiming that they have a vaccine. I think we should be looking more into that as opposed to scaremongering about the Russians. That is worthwhile to say. Saying something like the Russians have a vaccine that works and QAnon told me that's not going to facilitate the life of some intellectual community online. It's going to actually bolster the cathedral's narratives that the people who oppose it are wacky conspiracy theorists that ramp up on any rumor they hear that goes against the progressive narrative, whether it's valid or not. Oh, I skipped one. I'm sorry. So Nicodemus Smith for New Zealand $5. Do you play Go yourself? It's a beautiful game. I do play Go myself. As a matter of fact, my wife and I met online, and she saw that I played Go. So I haven't played Go for years and years and years because in Seattle there was a really nice Go club, and I knew someone who played. And here I don't, and I know I was never very good at it, And it's a beautiful game, and I talked to some of the people who programmed the artificial intelligence who could beat all of those with the 9-don players, those Go experts. It is a beautiful game, but my wife saw that I played Go on my dating profile, and it was on a Catholic dating website, and she thought I played Pokemon Go. And she was quite relieved when it was actually the Chinese-Japanese board game. And one of the first dates we went on was, I think I took her to the Go Club and we played the game there. It's really nice in Seattle if you ever go. They have a really nice Go Club. They have like a tatami room where you can play Go on like the tatami mats with one of the classic setups. It's really, really nice. And if you go one of their beginner nights, they'll totally improve your game. I guarantee it. But thank you for that super chat. I don't really have a lot to say about Go right now, but I'll keep on going. Okay. Mind's Eye for $10. What's the distinction between cozy, kitsch? What's the distinction between... Oh, this is an excellent question. What is the distinction between cozy and kitsch? I feel like we shouldn't give the left the impression that the distant right can be domesticated, a la the curate from War of the Worlds. Was the curate one of the people who was like we can be domesticated by the Martians or whatever? Yeah. This is an excellent question. So. The last edited video I made was on the concept of cozy, which is something I got from Moldbug, but it was an internet meme going around for a while, and I wanted to elaborate on it. And cozy, I was trying to contrast with nostalgia. Nostalgia being something that sort of self-validates your own ego, and that's a callback to really rather temporal fascinations because they make you feel important. Whereas something that is cozy is something that you can consume and feel like you've taken a step into a larger world after you've consumed it. And I agree that when I say something like cozy, I mean like reading a classic novel, or going for a hike, or experiencing classic art. And one thing I wanted to touch on, but I didn't get around to in the video, which Mind's Eye pointed out to, and I can talk about here a little bit, is that the difficulty with going towards these older things that are more classic and that feel like they come from a previous era and feel more robust, like a Norman Rockwell painting, is that they have this quality called kitsch. And Norman Rockwell is a great example of a piece of art that borders on kitsch. Uh, a, an even worse example is what's that artist that makes those paintings of cottages? Like he makes paintings of like forests and cottages that are they're always really really quaint, and you see them, and oftentimes you can complete the paintings, and it's horrible art. And I think my wife might like him. But these pieces of art are kitsch. They're not threatening pieces of art. They don't expand your horizons, and they're easy to make and they're easy to replicate. And of all people, Roger Scruton did an excellent series of talks where he tries to distinguish what's truly artistic from what's kitsch. And this is always the danger, and this is one of the dangers of, a lot of people on the right wing, and I've had this conversation with people like Fritz Imperial, and there's a certainly danger for anime too, is when you take something that looks beautiful or looks pretty, and you frame it and you call it art. You could be enthroning beauty, but you could also be making kitsch. You could be making and what kitsch is it's easy beauty, right? What is that artist? I forget his name. It's gonna kill me. Maybe I can Google it. Excuse me for the dead time. Oh, I'm never gonna find it. Okay. Yeah, Thomas Kincaid. That's it. Thomas Kincaid. Yeah, a Kincaid painting is something that no one takes seriously as art. Now, if you look at a Kincaid painting, it looks pretty. It's representational, it's inviting, it's cozy, but it's totally non-threatening and it's totally domesticated. And the person who super chatted, Mind's Eye, he kind of got to the heart of what's wrong with kitsch. The problem with kitsch is it doesn't actually expand your horizons. Well, it's not necessarily pornographic. It's kind of almost pornographic in a certain way, and it really is the antithesis to all art, because it essentially risks turning an endeavor that should be at least somewhat challenging into something that can be consumed in a cheap way, in a way that's safe, in a way that's domesticated. In a certain way, art should never be, or true art should never be without a challenging element. And I guess I've defined here what kitsch is. I don't know if I can really advise on how we can avoid making it. I think that will have to be the subject of future videos. But if you want someone who's much more intelligent than I am, give you an idea of how to avoid kitsch in art, this is something that Roger Scruton has extensively talked about. And I'm sorry, someone's asked me about race realism again. I just answered it. I'm sorry, dude. Like, is this person trolling me? Okay, well, I'm not answering anymore. It should be obvious why that's not a valid critique of Christianity, for or against. It's totally parallel to Christianity's claims and its powers. But I guess going back to the meaningful question, yeah, I don't think I can. Kitsch is like porno kitsch is like pornography in another aspect. In addition to being easy, in addition to being something that just triggers your beauty response in a way that's similar to how pornography triggers your sexual response, it also is something that is notoriously hard to define the boundaries of. All I can say is, for kitsch, I know it when I see it. And this is something that Norman Rockwell is really the borderline for me. If it's cuter than Norman Rockwell, then I'm pretty sure I'm saying kitsch and not art. Norman Rockwell had a number of really great paintings that I really appreciate. I really enjoy that they exist. I love seeing them, and every time I see them, I get a nice, warm, cozy feeling. But they're not challenging. They don't represent reality in any meaningful sense. They don't encourage me to radically bring that idea into my own life or to change myself in some way. I never have a conversation about an idea that I saw in a Norman Rockwell painting. But they still have some artistic quality. So that's really, for me, that's the boundary. I'll say that. Now I'll have to go on, but thank you for the super chat. Charlemagne for $5. Academic Agent is trying to pull together a Clash of Christians stream with a guest from each of the largest Christian sects. You'd fit the Cath slot. Oh man, isn't there someone else they can send? I am not the world's best apologist. And speaking of Nick Fuentes, the last time I tried my hand at Catholic apologists, it was me explaining to Andy Worski the finer points of theology. It was me, Nick Fuentes, JF, and Andy Worski. And JF was doing like the intelligent new atheist Steven Pinker talking points that that actually needed to have responses, and then after me and Nick Fuentes would come up with our apologetic response, Andy Worski would follow up with like the most brain dead stupid follow up you could possibly imagine. One thing I'll say about this is that there's a reason why blood sports never worked for the right, but it totally worked for the left. Is that you can be a complete idiot and still play blood sports on the left, because you'll never have to come up against a challenging idea that you can't dismiss as racist, sexist, or homophobic before you even evaluate on merits. So you've got somewhat intelligent people like Vaush and kind of dumb people like Xanderhall, or maybe not dumb, but young, right? Too young and not knowledgeable enough people like Xanderhall are making fortunes for themselves doing this blood sports thing a year after it died on the right, because you can indeed be as dumb as Andy Worski and do it. But my guess, if there's no one else to represent Catholicism, I'd come on to Academic Agent's stream. But there are so many apologetic people out there. I have to believe there's someone that's more knowledgeable on the subject than myself. Plus, my schedule, my schedule ain't what it was a year and a half ago. It's way more constrained. I barely have time to do live streams for myself anymore. But thank you very much, Charlemagne, for the contribution and the invitation. I'm going to keep on going, otherwise I'll be here all night. Nerve AMV Maker for $20. Do you ever have a conflict between people you admire versus ideas you support? I am sympathetic to Moldbug's Tory view of the American Revolution, yet I find men like Washington more admirable than anyone on the British side. Well, he came up with a perfect example. Thomas Jefferson is the perfect example of a true aristocratic spirit who is... he basically, during the French Revolution, endorsed Thomas Paine's brainlet takes on liberty and violence and social order crumbling away to produce the Enlightenment man. Yet he was this true aristocrat, a wordsmith, a great leader. I think you can admire people who you don't agree with. I think a few streams ago I was talking about how someone who I think was absolutely horrible ideologically, the Shogun Tokugawa. Is it Ieyasu Tokugawa? Is that his first name? But he was an oppressor of Christians, one of the worst oppressors of Christians of all time. Yet I have to give him some credit for realizing the danger that the West might have posed to Japan. And so I think there just needs to be more nuance in how we approach people, especially historical characters. You can disagree with the project of the Enlightenment and still find the advocates of the Enlightenment to be heroic. Certainly, I think Washington was. And, despite Moldbug's take that, that essentially the founding fathers were cooperating with a foreign superpower, France, and a political splinter cell in the Whigs in Parliament in Britain, and Moldbug talks about this like the revolution was a foregone conclusion. I don't think it was. I think it was a near-run thing. I think Cornwallis nearly had it if several of his campaigns had worked. If the French hadn't been there at Yorktown, if the armies of Washington had been defeated at Yorktown, things like that had happened during the war. I think the founding fathers gambled a lot on creating an independent country, and they won, and that has to be admired. And the other thing I say this about this is true, especially with warriors. And here, Tokugawa certainly wasn't a great warrior. Washington was a great general, or an okay general. But I'll say this, my family immediately suffered under the hands of the Red Army, under Tito and Stalin. But if you ask me whether I wanted monuments taken down, if the Red Army was ever rightfully accused of genocide against Germans or ethnic cleansing of Germans, and there is a similar movement as there is in the United States to tear down the statues of great Red generals or just standard monuments to the Red Army, I would be absolutely opposed to that. The Red Army fought heroically at Stalingrad. They fought heroically against Hitler's Germany. And whether or not they fought for Stalin politically, that doesn't detract from their heroism. And I think it's cheap and wrong to say that the heroism of war is removed because the political cause ultimately was shown to be false. That is to say, I imagine that if any of us ever get to heaven, which I hope for all of us, I think we'll find that every cause that anyone's ever fought for will seem like a losing cause, or will feel like the wrong cause. I think that's how it will seem in hindsight. But you respect the heroism of historical figures who are mistaken. And I think that's just part of being a healthy intellectual space. I don't know, that's a tall order, but I think that's more or less my answer to this. I guess this is a $20 super chat. Maybe I can give a little bit more thought to it. I don't know. I mean, I think with Tokugawa, I think it's very difficult for me because I see things to admire, and I also think that he was a total villain. And I don't want to declare anyone to be in hell, but he certainly has a very, very good, he has a very, very good chance of being in hell for a variety of horrible, horrible reasons. I just want to make sure that I think when we look back in history, we should admire more and we should judge less. And even with somebody who is as horrible an oppressor of religion and Christianity as Issei Tokugawa, I think it always does better to say, hey, he did kind of have a point. He did kind of have a point about how Japan needed to separate itself from the West. Okay, I'll consider that question answered. So Charlemagne for $10. Woods can't comprehend Moldbug because Woods is looking for a complete epistemology, and Moldbug is just a programmer debugging a problem. That's a great way of putting it. The philosopher and the engineer don't have a shared language. Yeah, I guess. I think that quote from George Box, I think that is a great philosophical statement and a great programming statement as well, or a statistical statement. So that that's a good point. I mean, so many people from neo-reaction come from an engineering background. We need to respect that. And what's so funny is that we're all of these engineers, we're all of these ex-engineers or people with a technical background, and we're all saying, oh man, we need artists, we need poets, we need musicians, we need people who can have a positive vision, and the best we can come up with is crackpots. Now, I think crackpots is a good thing to have. I love me some crackpot. I mean, the people who came up with the scientific revolution, the alchemists, they were crackpots. Most works of genius start as a work of being a crackpot. So that's not a bad thing. But I think, you have Keith Woods uses a different language to talk about problems than Moldbug does. And like I said, I've seen some really good videos from Keith. He's a good content creator. I don't like his affiliations. I think his fascination with National Socialism is stupid. I'm just going to come out and say it. But he has a role, and maybe he is closer to the artist than my engineering brain is. And maybe that's something that we need to explore more of. I have offered him a live stream, but I don't think live streams are really his thing. Certainly contentious live streams are not his thing. He does interviews, but he never does contentious live streams. So I don't think that will ever happen. But I have offered him one. I don't want to shame him into a live stream, though. If he doesn't think that that's good for him, then we'll just keep on doing this response video thing if that's what he wants. Charlemagne for $10. Well, sorry, I already read that one. The Wooster for $2. Isn't Woods a homosexual? I have no knowledge of Woods' sexuality, nor do I really care. I guess, as a Catholic, I'm opposed to homosexuality generally, so I would hope not. But I have no knowledge of Woods' sexuality, so I'm going to decline to answer that with all due respect. So, Jonathan Eubanks for $10. I never catch these things live as an East Coaster. Wanted to thank you for making my favorite videos on the internet. You can really move people with your words. You're a huge inspiration, Hart. Oh, well, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I really want to make, in the last 2 weeks, I really want to make videos. I have this video. I recorded it. It's like 2 hours long, and it's about like academic bias. And it was totally substandard. So I think I might release it as an unlisted video and then tweet out the link if anyone wants to see it or listen to it. I just don't want to put any more investment in things. And I want to save my time for videos that have the potential to be more future-proof than that. But thank you very much for the kind words, Jonathan Eubanks. I really appreciate it. God bless. I hope that I can continue to do these things. I think, this is the thing. I think this channel is going to be around for a while. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll ban every single right-wing channel ever who's, 3 degrees separated from Richard Spencer or whatnot. Maybe everyone to the right to Sargon is a dead man walking. But even then, I think I'll continue to make videos on BitChute. I think that when I look back on my career on YouTube, I think I'll be the person that was just around for a really long time. Because I love making videos. I just love making videos. I love talking about these ideas. And this is not something, I never feel myself in the millennial woes conundrum where I'm just paralyzed, where I don't want to make videos anymore. This is just something that I like doing. And so I'll keep on doing it as long as people enjoy it, as long as there's an audience. But thank you very much. Miles Marco Bennett for £2. I never heard you speak on Bronze Age Pervert. Any thoughts? Well, I read his book. I liked it. God, it's poorly written. I mean, it's written in pidgin. It's written in broken English. It's written by someone who is obviously writing English as a second language. I think it's something that I think that if you want to create right-wing art or come up with new right-wing ideas, I think it's a must-read. But I see it as an incomplete project. Keith Woods did a video on Bronze Age Pervert, and his issue with it was that it wasn't like analytic philosophy. His issue with it was that this I mean, in Bronze Age Mindset, his book it reminded me of Beyond Good and Evil because it's more or less of the same format. It's a list of aphorisms and observations about the world. And if you've ever read Beyond Good and Evil, I mean, it's more or less the same thing. I mean, by the time Nietzsche wrote Beyond Good and Evil, he had proved that he was able to make more analytic. And no, I don't mean that in the category in the school of philosophy. I mean that just in the sense of rigor and depth. But he had proved that he could write in-depth, serious philosophy. So publishing a book of aphorisms didn't leave him open to that critique. But it reminded me of the same. I got the same sensation reading it. If you read Good and Evil, and if you have a choice of whether to read Beyond Good and Evil and Bronze Age Mindset, probably I'd prefer Nietzsche. And obviously I disagree with Nietzsche about a number of things, not the least of which is God. But that is the more important author to read. But you get the same sensation. Like, you read a sentence and you're like, oh man, oh wow. Like, I bet I could take everything that I interact with and try to see it in the way that this sentence is true. This is a tool that a lot of philosophers have that I think a lot of normies. It's sort of like it's sort of a tool to stop yourself from being an autist. An autist is someone who just forces everything into the same model and just cranks the model. Oftentimes, this singular focus on one model allows people with this kind of thinking pattern to uncover enormous discoveries that enhance the human race. But in our present age, I've noticed more and more this mistake of just being totally myopically trapped by one model is constraining more thoughts than it's discovering. Really, at this point, I think we really have juiced as much juice as we can out of weaponized autism. I think we need more people who kind of pop us out of our mindset and really wake us up to new ideas. There's a reason why people are getting new ideas when they take LSD. It's because our ideas and our thoughts are so. And I think this is more a result of our culture than. I mean, don't take illicit drugs. I'm not recommending that, but I think our particular time, modernity itself, has trapped our imaginations, and we need to break out of it. And one of the experiments people can do is, if you have an idea that you really disagree with, just walk around for 6 hours. If you don't walk, take it up. I've taken up walking, and it's just great. It puts your mind in a better place. But while you walk, just take the assumptions of your enemies and then just pretend that you believe them absolutely. Pretend to be a Muslim for 40 minutes while you walk. Pretend to be an SJW when you walk around. Pretend to be someone who doesn't believe the Holocaust happened, and then walk around with that idea. And you'll see people say do this, and you'll hear a lot of hippy dippy people who say things like, well, all ideas are kind of true. They say this a lot, but if you do this enough, you'll see that there's a division in your mind that's just as easy as the truth-false distinction. And that is, some worldviews are very, very easy to imagine. And moreover, when you imagine them, they make the world seem fresh and new, and there's all these new possibilities. Other ideas, and they could be ideas that you consider false, right? Like the multi-universe idea is an example of this. This is an idea that I think is poorly evidenced and probably false. But it does make you think a lot about a lot of interesting ideas when you speculate on whether it might be true. But you also will discover that there's a new boundary. You'll understand that there's some ideas that you can't even imagine how they would be true. It's just like you think about this idea and you're like, I can't even imagine how a person thinks that the world is like this. It's utterly ridiculous. The world makes no sense. The code just crashes. And so I think you able to really differentiate between fanciful insights and utter intellectual trash. so there's that. I recommend doing that. And broad change mindset is something that's very good at inspiring just that kind of out of the box thinking. Okay, yeah. Bronze Age pervert, more as a thought experiment, less as some kind of serious philosophical idea. Emmett 4, is the Canon Society dead? What's going on there? I've been kicked off of Discord, which is where I did all of my Canon Society stuff. I also am locked down, so I can't meet with anyone in person. I think that the Canon Society project is dormant until we can resurrect it after the lockdown, or until we can get an alternative to Discord. I can't move forward without one of those two options open to me. I just can't. I have no way to move forward online because I can't meet with large groups of people online because I don't have Discord anymore. And I'm not building on Discord anymore. So there's a project that we have that we're working on building an alternative on Riot. It's a very promising project that I'm trying to do some work on. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm trying to build locally first or people with conversations. I'll tell you one thing that I can't do. I can't spend hours and hours and hours producing documents like mission statements for an audience that I can't even talk to. I don't have the time to spend hours and hours fleshing out the website like I did a year and a half ago. I have very discrete periods of clear time, which I'm forced to dedicate to certain projects at the expense of other ones. And with the lockdown in place, the Canon Society is a project that has to, for the time being, become dormant, at least as far as I'm concerned. I did hand it off to people who were working on it behind the scenes. I know that kind of sounds like the millennial woes behind the scenes, but presumably the Discord server is still running. But I can tell you from my perspective, the offline branch is on hiatus because of COVID. The online branch is on hiatus because they've nuked all of our servers from orbit. We've got to get one of those two. The whole point of the Canon Society was to build those two things and then connect them. Without the ability to build those two things, we have to stop and press pause and then come back to it later. So I really apologize for that. By no means do I consider the Canon Society dead. I want to make that clear. I have every intention to organize under that banner and to keep everything we've produced under that banner alive for as long as possible. But we can't keep digital things we produce alive if every time we do this, we get nuked by the server that we're interacting with. So that's what we'll go with. Argyle Euphoria for $5. Quote, is Curtis Yarvin's verbal tick for real or is it an affectation? Why would you affect a verbal tick? I'm very aware of my verbal ticks. I say too when I'm tired, so you could probably go back and listen to the stream. I'm probably saying more now than I was before. I say moreover a lot. I say functionally a lot. That's a word I overuse constantly. I got it from Megan McArdle, and I've noticed that people who watch my videos are overusing it too. I think it's a useful word. I don't know. But you got to give a man their verbal tics. Sometimes it's kind of endearing. Moldbug, if you're a fan of watching Moldbug's live streams, oh god, now I should have wrote this down in my notes. Most of his live streams in the last 2 months have been more or less repetitions of the same 7 ideas, and they've kind of been repetitive. But if you're looking for a really, really good live stream, and I'll put this in the low bar, he did an excellent live stream with an Ethiopian Christian about the history of Ethiopia. And man, it's the exact kind of thing that I'm talking about with Bronze Age mindset. I'm not Ethiopian. My culture is about as far away. I mean, other than being Christian, it's about as far away from Ethiopia as you could possibly imagine. But as soon as I heard about the community, I immediately wanted to learn everything about it. And I immediately wanted to take his learnings and see if I could make my own community stronger. And I was thinking, man, you could write a book about this conversation. It was fascinating having those two people. And I subscribed to that, and I don't remember the name of that Ethiopian gentleman's. He has a YouTube channel. I'll put the link of the conversation with Curtis in the description so you can subscribe to his channel. It's fascinating. I immediately want to learn more about the Ethiopian community, and I wanted to see, is every community of Christians is another opportunity for learning about what we could do better, what we could do right. Ethiopians have had a number of experiences that us as Western Christians have not, that myself as an indigenous European Christian have not. They've been conquered. I guess Germans have been certainly conquered in the past 100 years, but in a little bit of a different way. And I wonder if we're trying to learn to live as minorities, there are learnings there that they're just so. There's so many possibilities in that, and I highly recommend that stream. It was actually the Franklin who turned me on to it. I think in one of his, I think he's been forced to, for family reasons, resort more and more to live streams as well. But I always watch his live streams, and he always turns me on to something new. Oh, I forgot I think the thing that he turned me on to was he commented on the fact that the parents he was doing some kind of play date, and they didn't know the words to Farajaka, and I realized that I didn't have the correct words to Farajaka in French for the third verse. so I guess I might count as a degenerate in the Franklin's book. I knew it goes Farajaka, domez-vous. I think it's Santes Matines is the third verse, and then it goes ding dong ding. But you forget these things over time. But it is important to know these. That's such a cultural touchstone when you think about it. Everyone should. O My Liebe Augustine should be the German song everyone knows, and Farajaka should be the French song that everyone knows. That's certainly part of our heritage. And I'm going to try to incorporate it more and more with baby as he gets a little older. Skydancer for $5. If the bluish question is not significant, why would you consider your channel feed? Yeah, this is a good question. I was anticipating this question. If the bluish question is not significant, why would your channel be taken down for discussing it? Because bluish communities have a lot of power. They're highly ethnocentric, and they smash anyone who crosses them. This community destroys people who talk about it negatively. Is it a secret that they do this? It's not to anyone who has eyes in their head. I guess you think because the community guards itself well, they must have some deep dark secret that they're guarding against. I don't know. I don't see that, and I want to respect Skydancer's question. He's a great guy. I really respect, and I respect this question because this is a question that I knew I was going to get. One reason that you see a house and you see that it's guarded, you see that it's got machine guns and poison gas and electrical wires around it and death traps, and one explanation is that they're hoarding stolen Spanish ingots, and if you break in, you'll be rich. The other explanation is they're paranoid. I'm voting for the fact that they're paranoid. But but the question also is, when you have something that's so dangerous to go against, the question is it worth the risk? And it's just not. I don't think it is. Why would you charge a machine gun nest when the result of that charge isn't even really productive? I mean, this is, what I want to kind of ask to all the people who are kind of stuck on this whole blue thing, right? I don't understand all the people who are so Kevin McDonald. He's off YouTube. You can't find any of his lectures on YouTube. You can find his lectures on BitChute if you want to watch him. I watched back in the heyday of 2016 when the alt-right was an ascendant force. I felt I was getting links sent to me with Kevin McDonald lectures on a bi-weekly basis, and they're always the same points. You've seen one Kevin McDonald lecture, it feels like you've seen them all. And if there is some secret, thesis that's hidden in one of his more obscure books that, me and Curtis Yarvin just weren't based enough to read all the way deep down into the B science to actually learn. If there is this key insight there, he certainly doesn't mention it when he gets a 2-hour platform. Keith Woods himself said, he quoted Einstein, and I think this is an apocryphal quote, which makes it even funnier that Keith Woods used this apocryphal quote from Einstein. Keith Woods said that Keith Woods quoted Einstein as saying that if you can't repeat your idea on the back of a postage stamp, it isn't worth the paper it's written on. And that's true. I mean, good ideas, succinct theses can be summarized in 2 hours, at least enough to want me to dig more. And what I get every time I listen to Kevin McDonald, and this is where I'm going with this, in fact, when I listen to everyone who's just obsessed with this whole blue thing, I get a laundry list of grievances that all they do is get you more obsessed with this laundry list of grievances. I understand that there are individual bad actors. I understand that ethnocentrism is a thing. I understand that this community is well situated inside the information distributing apparatuses of our society, which makes them our immediate concern. But this idea doesn't generate any new ideas. Where does it go after that? Where does it go? Is it just this over? Because people who talk about this just talk about this over and over and over again, and it never seems to get to the point where it actually leads to something that's constructive. And I guess that's always what's missing from, oh, you need to talk more about this thing that gets your channel banned. If I'm going to charge a machine gun nest, I need more than just they're guarding this particular area really, really heavily. The Wooster for $10. Hey Dave, have you heard of Rene Girard? I find his ideas of metic theory, sacrifice, and scapegoat fascinating. It explains narrative structures throughout the world and Christianity specifically. Yes, Rene Girard is a foundational reactionary author. I'm blanking on the name of his book that I read. Oh man, I'm gonna look this up really quickly. I know I read this. He's actually a famous convert to Islam, and he had a really funny face. Excuse me. What is that book he wrote? Is it I want to say Revolt Against the Modern World, but I know that's Julius Evola. Is it the Crisis of the Modern World, I think, right? Yeah, the Crisis of the Modern World. Okay, that's why I was, it was on the tip of my tongue, and I was about to say the Revolt Against the Modern World. So I really enjoyed reading Crisis of the Modern World. Maybe I should dedicate a video talking about Guénon, but I think I need to read more of his stuff. I think I need to read more of his stuff before I made like a sort of Mencius Moldbug style video on it. That was the problem with Carlyle, is that I do have plans sort of as part of the Distributism project, a section of it that's dedicated to explaining Thomas Carlyle's ideas. But the problem is that as much as I like Thomas Carlyle's ideas, I hate reading him. I hate his writing. I mean, I'll just come out and say it. I like his ideas. I really hate his writing style. I thought I thought his idea of narrating the French Revolution like it was a football game was didn't work. I find the later day pamphlets to be unnecessarily Byzantine, and he always buries his points, in the back end of paragraphs that start off talking about completely different topics. And for instance, if you read the first of the latter day pamphlets, which contains more or less the ideas that Moldbug takes from Carlyle, the idea of order being foundational to society and it being the main thing society's organized to preserve. You'll hear the first 3 chapters describing the contemporary political environment of Europe, the state of democracy, and the Pope. You won't get into any of those insights until pages and pages later of Byzantine prose. So that's prevented me from feeling like I really could do a larger treatise on Carlyle, but I'll do what I can. I'll say that. Okay, let's go back here. All right, continuing the super chats. Catholic critique of Catholic culture for $2. A second contribution in favor of Rene Girard. The problem is I'm not so sure. It's been at least 2 years since I've read Crisis in the Modern World, and I'm kind of having a hard time summoning up his key thesis. It definitely has a thing to do with sacrifice. Oh wait, am I thinking of the wrong person? Am I confusing Rene Girard for Rene Guénon? Okay, I am confusing the two. I'm sorry, yeah, I'm tired. Thank you, chat, for correcting me. Okay, yeah, well, there you go. This is why we don't stream at midnight. This is the only time I can stream to get... Oh. Okay, yes. Okay, no, I just have to confess to not having read Rene Girard, although he has been recommended to me. He's sitting somewhere 20 slots down on my list of books that I need to read. So, yeah, okay. So I am sorry. I just don't lack the competence to talk about Rene Girard. Man, French just need to get away from Rene Girard. There are too many common names. Jean, is this Jacques? I don't know. Is there a trend in France of giving your children terrible names like Apple? It seems like everyone here in California gives their kids just these ridiculous names. Maybe French authors, French parents should consider doing that so there's some diversity. Sorry about that. Yeah, I will take a look. Unfortunately, I'm sorry you guys had to use 2 super chats for this, but I just have to confess ignorance for Rene Girard. Okay, so Sadvist, basically Sadvist for $20, basically keyboard strokes. Re-optics substitute ghost dance with stand pat, stand patter, stand patism. Ghost dancing is nonce react speak that won't reach normies like red pill. Globalism is to internationalism as ghost dancing is to standing pat. So he's saying replace ghost dancing with standing pat. Stand patism. But what's the reference of stand pat? If I hear ghost dancing, at least I know the reference is to Native Americans. I don't know what stand patting even references. Is it just standing still? Or is standing pat is what we should be doing, right? Because you're saying globalism is to internationalism what ghost dancing is to standing pat. Meaning that what you're saying is I should look up what this standing pat thing is, and then because international, this is what I think was it. People on the right have been saying globalism is bad, but we still need to be international. We need to think internationally. So so he's saying standing pat is a better word. I need to wrap this up because my brain's going. It's so late. But I need to get through the super chats. Someone is accusing. I said the Ganon had a funny face. I mean, he did. I mean, look. I don't have the ability to project right now without disrupting the flow of the stream. But Rene Ganon had a really weird face, and it's as much as I'm doing this whole long beard thing, I don't think my face is nearly as weird. As a matter of fact, it's more or less indescript. It's a little bit fat, maybe. I don't know. Okay, let's get back to super chats. Yeah, I'll take a look at that standing pat thing when I get some time. I really wish I could talk more about standing pat. I just don't know what it is. I mean, all of the really hard questions are coming as my brain gets more and more tired. The Wooster for $10. I disagree with Moldbug's Protestantism. I disagree with Moldbug that Protestantism undid Christianity. I think it is very clear that humanism did that. Specifically Northern humanism as opposed to Southern humanism. This is the root of it. Yes, but this is the thing, right? I mean, what Moldbug says is that, we essentially tried to secularize Christianity. In the 19th century, we tried to secularize Christianity for basically two reasons. We had legal requirements that were attempting to make democracy less ideological. And at the time, we thought most ideologies were religious, so we would just ban religions from strict religions from claiming space institutionally. And the other reason is because certain discoveries like Darwin, certain scientific discoveries, cast aspersions on the idea of core Christian claims. Pardon me. And because of this, there was a large intellectual attempt to essentially take the humanistic ideas that really in the 18th century were radically secular and radically revolutionary, and then sort of crossbreed them with a certain form of Northern Protestant Christianity. This is sort of the narrative of how Dawkins got pwned. And I think that the genealogy really bears out. That's not to say that Protestantism destroyed the West in a sense, but that thing that destroyed the West evolved from Protestant roots. I would oppose vehemently the idea that Christianity destroyed the West. Christianity defines the West. Christianity is the Christianity and the Catholic Church are the father and mother of all good cultural elements of Europe. Really after Aristotle, there's a few pagan philosophers here and there, right? But they really are the heart and soul of what we are as Westerners. I guess two things is I think definitively the modern cathedral evolved from Protestantism. And secondly, I think modern Protestantism, modern-based Protestantism, has a harder time coming up with its genealogy in the modern age. And I think that's something that we're going to have to work on more. Or not, I'm not weird. I'm not a Protestant, but Protestants are going to have to come up with a thick Protestantism that doesn't fall into the traps that evangelical Christianity fell into in the 90s and 2000s. Evangelical Christianity is unfortunately what I consider to be a failed project. Now, let me be honest. I think my own form of Catholicism, the John Paul II Catholicism, the Catholicism that converted me, that I owe so much to, in many ways is also a failed political project. I think it was a much more successful one. I think it's it's very easy to see once better leadership is in place in the church, how it will go on to germinate into a new thing into the future. But it is. Wow, I'm tired. It is a good. It's a failed political project, and we need to acknowledge that. Protestantism needs to figure out how it doesn't become Saddleback Church, televangelists, and God is not dead. I mean, give me a story that doesn't go to like lowest common denominator. Because evangelical Christianity in the 90s and 2000s was lowest common denominator Christianity. Lowest common denominator Christianity is dead. And Protestantism needs to take the next step. Personally, I think that this will involve it becoming more apostolic, but that's my own bias as a Catholic. That project needs to be taken on by other Protestant warriors that I probably should have on the stream to talk about it. You know, I was going to, speaking of in real life things, just before this whole COVID thing came about, I was going to make an effort to do an interview in person with my friend Paul Vanderklay, who's a Protestant pastor, and we were just about to talk about new horizons for Protestantism. And he would be the perfect person to talk about this. And I really think that this conversation should go on in that direction. And I like to incorporate more people into that. But thank you for your super chat. Okay, guys. I'm going to have to say I want to start winding down the stream, so let's wrap up the super chats so I can justifiably end in a reasonable amount of time. Exagentime for $5. Why don't you offer to have a friendly discussion with Keith to sort out disagreements? You will realize you agree on more than you think. Yes, I know that I know that I agree on Keith Woods on a lot of stuff. I'm sure. I actually respect the guy a lot. Again, I really don't like his, the Richard Spencer stuff. I'm not on board with. But I do appreciate a lot of his insights, a lot of his attempt to give the right, firmer intellectual footings. I really respect that. I don't think Keith Woods is much of a live stream guy. I've offered to live stream with him. Let's be clear. He didn't deny it. He wasn't like, oh, I'll never live stream with you. He was like, oh, what's the point? Let's just, we said what we needed to say. It wouldn't be good YouTube. Would it be a good use of time? I just don't think Keith Woods likes that format. I think he likes video response. My only request for Keith Woods is could we just not do, could you take the first 10 minutes of your Moldbug video and your first 10 minutes of your response video to me and just cut them out? You need to read more is not a reasonable response to reasonably educated people on the internet who are having a more or less real-time conversation. I can't do a PhD thesis to respond to a 20-minute video. It's just not going to work. So let's just dispense with, you're not at my level. It's not, that's not the space we want to create here. But other than that, I have a fairly good opinion of Keith, and I'd love to, and I'm very open to a live stream. Absolutely. Eric Olofsson for New Zealand, $100. Wow. Well, thank you very much. There's no super chat to that, so you'll forgive me for just saying thank you very much for that generous contribution, although I'm not exactly sure how much it is. But thank you very, very, very much. Window Lick for $5. Good discussion. I like the bee sting analogy. Oh, yeah. I really think that's where it's going. I mean, that's what it has to be. I mean, we just have to be. A few ethnic communities can't destroy a civilization. They just can't. And if they are, you have to ask yourself, is there something that is so remarkably powerful about this minority community? Or is there something that's extraordinarily weak about us? And I think that any reasonable conclusion is that the bee is not extraordinarily strong. Your immune system is extraordinarily weak. and that means we need to buff the immune system. The Renegade Funk for 5,000 yen, I think it's $5. Thank you very, very much, Renegade. I like this type of stream. Keep up the good work. Happy to join sometime too. Ping me on Telegram if you're looking for work. I'm doing a lot of hiring for a major company. Well, I might, although I kind of like keeping my engineering and my ideas separate. But hey, Renegade of Funk, we do need to have a live stream sometime. My live stream slots. It used to be like just penciling things in. Now it's like playing Tetris. You have the time, or you don't. Petito Dominic for Canada, $7. You referenced Vaughn before. Have you ever read Green? Oh, I love Green. Oh yeah. So specifically the end of the affair. Thoughts on it if you have. So, but you're talking about Graham Greene, and so I used to run a book group at my local parish in Seattle, and one of the books we read was Graham Greene's End of the Affair. I really liked it. I'm trying to think about what I got out of it. I'll say it gave me less question marks than in Evelyn Vaughn's Brideheads Revisited. I was fascinated by it because it was just so weird. The characters are just so weird. And that's sort of what fascinates me with a lot of people like Flannery O'Connor is their ability to concoct these characters that seem just so out of place and in their own minds. And that's sort of what's fascinating me with Moby Dick more than anything else is the character of Ishmael. With Green, I felt like the characters were more rational. The End of the Affair is a very interesting conversion story. Oh wow. Okay. End of the Affair is a very interesting conversion story. It was like 4 years ago when I read this. So please forgive me. 5 years ago when I read this. And I thought that it was a beautiful story. And one, I guess what I'll say about Green is that I wish we had Christian art that looked like End of the Affair and less Christian art that looked like God Is Not Dead and half the stuff that comes out of Pureflix films. Yeah, and I really recommend it. Someone's telling me that 5,000 yen is $40 or $50. Well, the Renegade of Funk, thank you very, very much. I really can use the contributions, so thank you so much. I really appreciate all the generosity during these live streams. Lance Gubble for $5. Should folks in right-wing idea circles attempt to adopt academic vernacular and grammatic style, or should they write simply and to the point? Academic vernacular, in my experience, so there's sort of like, there's two academic vernaculars. There's the technical vernacular, where you just write in the most bland, straightforward, the result is X, our conclusions are Y. And, of course, even in technical papers, the ones that I write, there's like, you put like, you obviously have little like humble brags and you kind of sell it a little bit. But for the most part, the technical vernacular is bland. Just the facts, please. Thank you. And some conclusions and speculations here and there, but then called out as such. The sort of academic vernacular that, say, Ben Burgess would employ, I could do without that. Academic vernacular, I guess academic vernacular is useful for one and only one thing, and that is to defend yourself from criticism. And I guess if I've been known to strategically employ academic vernacular. You call that, this is all the thing problematic. That's academic vernacular. Problematic is how people used to say, I think you're full of shit, without actually getting called out on it. Because if you go in and someone published a paper and you're like, that's factually incorrect, how dare you publish it? Your thesis is bullshit. That's an attack on their career potentially. But if you go like, I find your thesis to be problematic, it's a way of like covering your ass. It's a way of criticizing somebody without owning it. I think that it really depends on the context. I think that if you interact with the mainstream, please, by all means, adopt as much academic bullshit terms as you possibly can. Calling intersectionality, using academic terms to cast aspersions on it without violating orthodoxy is very, very good. That's the proper way to approach it. But when right wingers talk around each other, I mean, at that point, if we're among friends, if we're among our own intellectual community, just borrow a page out of Bronze Age Pervert, or borrow a page out of any live streamer, and just say what you mean. I know I oftentimes confuse my own speech with overcomplicated words, but that's a vice, not a virtue. Please don't be like me in that regard. If anything, this presents sort of an opportunity for us to one up the cathedral. If we speak politely, but in plain English, in right-wing ideas spheres, in right-wing ideas spaces, but then when you go into the mainstream, when you go on CNN, when you go to a college campus, everyone's just bullshitting each other with layers of kabuki theater, of fake speech that just you have to peel away in order to even get to what people really mean. That's the cathedral suffering for its own academic dishonesty. That's cathedral suffering from its own attempt to purge itself of wrong thinkers. It's suffering from its own paranoia. And if you have a space where you can talk openly and without jargon, that's something to be valued. I'll just say this. I mean, when you're among doves, be a dove. When you're among hawk, be a hawk. When you're among academic bullshitters, which is pretty much everyone in the cathedral right now, speak like an academic bullshitter. But if you're among people who can take it straight, just give it to me straight and speak politely and directly. Someone's saying, I don't have money, but I'm an artist. Can you post an image that epitomizes the end of the affair? Thanks for inspiration. That's interesting. I mean, the one that comes immediately to mind are, I don't know who painted this, but Evening at the Night Owl, that very famous Chicago painting, where all these individuals are up late at night at this well-lit cafe, and it's a feeling of emptiness. The end of the affair is about loneliness. It's about personal loneliness in the middle of a life and death scenario. It's during the Blitz, and it's about a bunch of people realizing that the Blitz is going on, which ordinarily would imbue you with meaning. War is a force that gives us meaning. But even though they're getting bombed and there's a war on, they still feel like their lives lack meaning. And the titular affair is the protagonist and his the person he has the affair with attempting to find meaning in adultery. And there is I think the conclusion is that it can only be found in some spirituality. Maybe that spirituality can be heightened by war. But I think the message is that for people who are so cut off from a spiritual language, even a circumstance that should elevate humanity is sort of lost on them. I guess, is it Evening at the Night Owls? I remember. Is it Edward Hopper? Edward Hopper. That's it. The Edward Hopper painting. Yeah, that sounds good. To be quite honest, I remember The Power and the Glory more than End of the Affair from Graham Greene, but that's a little bit too explicitly Catholic. I kind of liked End of the Affair, or if you want a Graham Greene work of fiction, then you're not much of a reader. Watch the classic Orson Welles movie. The Third Man, which was a screenplay was written by Graham Greene, and the protagonist, not Harvey Lime, but the protagonist, is based on Graham Greene's character. And it's my dad's favorite movie because he grew up in post-war Vienna, and again, it's a deeply personal story of ethics that plays out in a Vienna that's been bombed to hell and back at the end of World War II. Yeah, if you're not a reader, I definitely recommend checking that out. Is it just the Nighthawks? Okay. Okay, so okay, so last question, I think. Is this the last question? Yeah, this is the last question. Thank you so much because I'm going to have to retire soon. Right flag for Canadian $100. I'm happy to donate to you because you do great work, but I would prefer if a large chunk didn't go to Google. Aren't there super chat alternatives? Because I would still like the opportunity to ask you a question. Thank you so much. I'm trying to get my Subscribestar back online. And you know, I really should do this. I really should stop using super chats. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't want to swear, but fuck Google. I mean, why are we doing this? You know, I just did this out of laziness. But given that, in the light of the fact that I'm in the process of larger projects and my time is much less than it used to, I should just start up the Subscribestar tip jar, go to there for questions, or lacking that, just use Entropy. I really don't. I really. I really don't want to use the stupid system either. It steals your money, and I really shouldn't. You deserve better, as the viewers, and I wouldn't mind having a little bit more of the money too, to cover the expenses with the baby and all. So I'm going to end here. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll save this for my projects. Right now I'm working on the Shrek video. I haven't started recording it, and I'm going to give some. So the video is largely on 3 works of fiction that have been inspirational to me. The work that is inspirational because I hated it is Shrek. And there's a work that I respect, but I initially loved it and I grew more cold on, which is Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. And then the last one is Eugene Ionesco's The Rhinoceros. And I'm working on a video that goes through those 3 works of fiction on the subject of understanding the feeling of collectivism, the feeling of community, and how I grew to understand that. But I need some time to work on that, guys. So I apologize. My time has been terrible in the last few weeks because the baby has just not been sleeping through the night, and I can't just leave my wife to deal with that all day. So and of course you're sleep deprived too when you deal with these things. So I will say that will be what I'm working on. Thank you so much for joining me for this live stream. I hope you guys like the new curtains. I wonder if we even. Well, I'll do that later. We have some pictures that are around the area, and one of them is kind of a neat meme picture that my wife bought, and I kind of wanted to incorporate in the video, but it's much too late to do something like that. So, anyway, I will have to sign off now. Thank you so much for the contributions and for listening in. God bless and have a very safe and good week. I hope to be doing more live streams in the future because I think I'm not doing the whole I do a video anymore. But have a very blessed week. Good night.